good bit to get through. Just to welcome everyone today, we have 4 members online: Alan Robinson, Colin McGrath, Nuala McAllister and Diane Dodds. And we have, at the minute, we have Danny, Donnelly and myself in person. Just to remind members about your microphones, and as they could pick up conversation between members. Only me and you, Danny, anyway. And a brief overview of today's business. First, we will have a briefing from Haemophilia NI. Then we'll also have departmental briefings on the strategy for stopping domestic and sexual violence and abuse, and on Brexit related issues. The committee will then consider a statutory rule and an SL1. So the meeting is now open to the public and will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And just to remind members and anybody in the public gallery, just if you can keep your mobile phones on airplane mode and muted during the meeting. I have an apology from Linda Dillon. She may join later, but as it stands isn't likely to make it. I don't think there's any other apologies. I know Orlia is running a few minutes late, but she will be here. And we have, as I said, 4 members online as well. I have no chairperson's business at this stage. So if we can move on to the draft minutes of the meeting held last week on the 23rd of May at page 6 of your meeting pack. Are members content with the minutes as drafted? Yeah.
Content.
And I've no matters arising. So we move to item number 5. It's Haemophilia NI. And we will have Nigel here to speak about the infected blood scheme. Nigel, how are you?
Sure.
Nigel, you're very welcome, and some of us have met you before, I think, at our planning day as well. So it's good to see you, and in different circumstances now, given some of the recent developments. So we've got 4 members online. Nigel, myself and Danny are obviously here, and we'll potentially have one more coming in person as well. So just to make you aware of that. Members, we have about 45 minutes in total for this session. And Nigel will make some open remarks, and then I'll open it up for questions or comments. So whenever you're ready, Nigel, you can kick off.
That's very kind of you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and present. We very much value, as a community, the opportunity to express our interests and our concerns in relation to victims and prisoners legislation and the aftermath of the public inquiry, which, for those of us who were over, was extremely traumatic, very powerful. And an opportunity to divest ourselves as we could of some of the major issues that had been troubling us over a number of years. This public inquiry has gone on now since it was established in 2017, and Sir Robert Francis contributed towards the compensation architecture. He currently is the shadow chair of the new authority that will be dealing with compensation matters as appointed by the government. And Sir Brian, who looked after us as victims and who dealt effectively with the issues at hand under his terms of reference, was very thorough and very detailed and very clear and concise in how he presented his final speech and statement. And we were most grateful for that. It had been, for all of us, an opportunity to face the issues and get answers where we could, and have a sense of justification, because there were a number of issues we felt we knew, but we didn't have that clarity. And that clarity was certainly given through Sir Brian and through his staff, both in the report, which is quite a voluminous document. There were 2 hard copies, and the remaining 5 copies were on egress for us. So it was a very worthwhile experience and a very cathartic experience, and one that I think most of us have valued greatly. There were over 1,000 attending, plus all those who were online. So the message was out, and the government responded very quickly, as they indicated they would. 2 of my colleagues, Conan McElrath from UK Haemophilia Society and Paul Kirkpatrick from Friends and Family of Haemophilia NI, and myself had a meeting from Hemophilia and I had a meeting with the Minister, the Cabinet Minister, Minister Glenn, and he was a very personable in his meeting with us and very clear as to what he was trying to achieve through Cabinet desire. He was reassuring, and to be fair to the government, they have come forward quickly and responded. They also acknowledged the right of the day for the victims and Sir Brian, given the fact that that public inquiry had spent in excess of 135 million of taxpayers' money. So it was important that it was given fair due on its day. Now, the minutiae of what we're trying to tease through is critical. The devil is in the detail, Chairman, and that is always the case. You have, I believe, received from Conan McElrath a document which should be in your receipt. I hope you've had a chance to read that. I'm going to acknowledge what Conan has put. We have worked very closely together. I think over the period I've had probably 36, over the period of the last month, I've had about 36 meetings, both with colleagues in England, Scotland and Wales, with solicitors and barristers, with the inquiry team, and also with my own colleagues and my community over here. So it's been a very fraught period, but one that had to come to an end. And in saying come to an end, it is only now coming to the beginning. The first process is over. We now have to tease through the issues of what has been presented to us through victims and prisoners legislation. And to be honest with you, there are a number of points that I want to highlight. We can address the issues that have been laid out by Conan, which are very helpful and give you a guide to what I'm going to be saying. But I want to focus on 4 issues in primary, and I want to give you an opportunity to address those issues and question. And if I can assist you in any way, I certainly will. The first thing that's important for us is that the inquiry recommendations need to be followed and implemented in Northern Ireland, as they will be in Scotland, England and Wales. The involvement of the regional assemblies in this process is absolutely critical. Critical for one reason, primarily, is that we are detached from the UK mainland. We're in a situation where we rely heavily on our local representation. As we have had support within cross-party support within Westminster in the Chamber and also in the House of Lords, it is important that the activity of what has happened and what goes on takes place under scrutiny here in Northern Ireland. We don't want hollow words, we want words full with action. So it's very important that we achieve that. So I say the first issue really is the recommendations are followed and implemented in Northern Ireland, and that will be the responsibility of the department. The second issue is that we want, as we currently have, a stakeholders group within the department managed by Leslie Heaney and very well staffed up until recently. Their role has been to help steer with members of the community issues concerning development of policy, approach to policy, insight into community needs, etc., etc. And that process, rather than coming towards a conclusion, needs to kick off with some more zest. In Scotland, our colleagues have a similar organisation, although it is much more insightful, and that is the Infected Blood Oversight and Assurance Group. We would like to see that type of organisation develop within the structures here in Northern Ireland. And it's important that they do from our perspective, because we need to ensure that there is an opportunity to maintain observance and audit on what takes place, both clinically and certainly within the structures of government and civil service. One of the issues that Sir Brian made quite clear in his recommendations was candour and transparency. That applied right across the board. And that has been recognised both by the Cabinet Minister in his speech in the House the following day, and also by the Prime Minister and the other party leaders cross-house in Westminster. We want an organisation that will allow us to participate and give us a degree of insight into how those recommendations are applied in Northern Ireland across the board. So that's something that I would like you to take serious consideration of. There are 2 other key issues One of them is because of the nature of what has taken place and the direct impact on individuals and families. The long-term psychological support is absolutely critical. We need to give a supporting arm to many members within our community who have lost loved ones, have had not the recognition thus far, who have not been given a clear picture until recently of what has taken place, and in some cases they don't have a clear picture of what happened with their relatives. That still doesn't exist. So the psychological support has been provided up until recently for victims, both infected and affected, and we had one psychologist who was available to us. As her workload seemed to reduce, the department determined that it would be appropriate to cease her, terminate her contract, and install within the haemophilia unit in Bridgewater Suite a full-time psychologist who would then be in a position to cater for all the demands within the haemophilia community, of which we have about 500. That's fine, except it's very difficult for those people who are not connected but have been transfusion victims or families of transfusion victims. And I will come back to that because there are a number of issues that are relevant in the final point that I want to make. The long-term issue for psychological support should be and should rest within the department, and they should maintain an opportunity for that support, as was highlighted by Sir Brian and his panels, on a regional basis, not specifically just in Belfast, but also where other cadres of our community exist, and that is in west of the Ban, around the Altmagelvin area. And those two focuses, which are tied in with the haemophilia centres, would be very helpful because there's a focal point. But I think looking after haemophilia is one thing. Looking after victims who have suffered as a result of this prolonged period, and I mean, I cite my case as an example. I've had haemophilia since birth. I was a mild haemophiliac, and I have a twin brother who passed away on Christmas Day as a result of the infection and as a result of a brainstem bleed caused by his haemophilia. I also have a younger brother who cleared. I found myself being more severe. I ended up with encephalopathy because I had 20% active liver. I think I maybe spoke to you about this previously, but as a reminder, and citing me as an example rather than anyone else, I also found myself then having scarring of the liver, cirrhosis as a result of the contaminated blood from the age of 16, unknowing to me until 1989. And then I find myself in a situation where I end up now with diabetes 1 because of the procedure to give me a liver transplant, which I had in 2018, and has gone very well for me. It has left me with a legacy, unfortunately, of diabetes 1, so a pancreas that needs assistance with insulin injections. And apart from that, I have had other associated problems in relation to 4 aneurysms and 3 brain tumours as a result of the treatment to try and kill the virus, which in itself is almost like chemotherapy. So having attended or being attended to at that stage by over a period of a year by nurses to my home because I couldn't be running back and forward to the city and hospital, I wouldn't have had a life. I at least was able to relax on my sofa and they would come and tend to me. But every week for that year, I ended up having additional transfusions to assist me because the impact of the viral treatment made it so difficult for my system to sustain itself over that period. But subsequently, that is all in the past. As they say, all this will change. And we now are in a situation where I'm relatively healthy. I'm thank God for my time and what I do. And I'm thoughtful for those who aren't with me. My brother's one. I lost 2 cousins as well. I lost Marie Crummy, who was a very close friend, who was a transfusion victim and lobbied to members in the previous committee in this House. And her daughter Danielle, and closely with Paul Kirkpatrick, and also with Conan McElrath, and Paul had lost his brother earlier on. So it's important from our point of view that we do see justice, and justice means not hollow words, and in that I come to the point that while the government has been very quick to respond and has acknowledged the need for compensation, and had done over some time, the issue is in the detail. And The government has given some cause for concern. I attended a cabinet briefing last Thursday, which unfortunately really was geared to ensuring that they were aware that they'd done a great job and they'd managed to get victims and prisoners through the House as one of those last wash-up pieces of legislation, and that it was going to go for royal assent, which it has done, and we're most grateful for that, and the work that was involved in getting that forward and through the process. But compensation is compensation, and Conan has very well identified the definition of compensation. He has also identified the duty of candour and the appropriateness of looking after those victims who they acknowledge require compensation. The compensation has been, we feel, less so in my case, because at 63 years of age, and given what I'm entitled to, I can live quite comfortably with that. But there are others who are in their 40s who have relied on and depend on, as many of the families do, the ongoing monthly payments which are secured through the department and also provided through BSO, Business Services Management. And that organisation, under the guidance and management of Colin Murray, has been invaluable to the community. Now, I have passed on to Roisin a correspondence in relation to Colin Murray contacting us to indicate quite clearly that yes, the process is moving at a pace as the Cabinet Office told us it would, and we appreciate that. But the issue rests on the fact that compensation will be wound into, or statutory supportive payments will be wound into the compensation. And if you're at my age and you find yourself with a compensation package that's going to be worth £1.5 million, it's no good to me at 64. That's the first thing. What am I going to do with it at 64 years of age? But it's a recognition. It's crown on head, and it's a recognition, and we acknowledge that. For those who are younger, I have, if I live to 79, the payment will be worth, over that period, £480,000. If you have individuals of Conan's age, as he quoted to the Minister when we had a meeting with the Cabinet Minister over here, it was important that they did identify that there needed to be a separation in both of those. And that separation had been acknowledged and recognised as important by Sir Robert Francis in his original architecture for compensation, and now in his position as Shadow Chair of the new body, and also by Sir Brian Langstaff, who was Chair of the Inquiry. And it appears as though there's a demarcation from that acknowledgement, when the government had always previously said your support payments are not compensation, not compensation. They're now telling us that they'll be wound up on the 1st of April, but it's okay, because those who are directly infected will get a downturn of £210,000. And that was the second letter that I gave to Roisin, which came through from Colin Murray today, which, as I say, indicates that the process has been moving well so far, and we're expecting that out. But that is only for those who are infected. Those who are affected, many of those are not even on the system. They haven't been registered. And when Sir Brian called his last public hearings in July of last year, and Richie Sunak and the Chancellor and Jeremy Quinn as ministers appeared with other colleagues and one member within the Health Service, senior member of the Health Service, there was an opportunity to hear and identify what needed to be done. Bearing in mind, in 2023, Sir Brian indicated that compensation should have been paid then. That means the process could have started at that stage, and people who were either registered with the inquiry but not necessarily registered in the respective regional health department would have been easier to identify. The process of compensation is, as it's been set out by the Cabinet Office, it will be an initial payment of interim to those individuals within 90 days of the Act becoming an Act and royal assent. So we're 86 days into that, I would say. Or we have 86 days left to that, I should say. But the process really is that those members who are not involved in the system, who need to be involved in the system, are not even registered. So a small group of individuals, the infected, will receive a second payment, and those who aren't will have to wait until that registration is complete. That's what we were told originally. We're not getting a clear picture. This Assembly needs to know that its victims are being represented equally, but also represented fairly. And in the regional assemblies, which previous governments and prime ministers and secretaries of state have relied on heavily and explained to us, is so important that local people have their say. I want you people to have your say and represent us. That's important. The job is not done. The job is only starting at this stage. So it's critical that we get that opportunity, and your voices should be heard and will be heard. And we will do all in our part to assist you in that. So representation at this stage is very important, and ensuring that we have a process that answers and is accountable to the recommendations. Putting them in and getting the impact from those recommendations is absolutely critical. Otherwise, all that has been set up, all that has been spent, is of nothing and no value. So the importance for us is to ensure that the process does what it says on the tin. And in Conan's case, if he was to receive, at his age, and he's in his 40s, if he was to receive up to 79, let's say that's the average age for a healthy meal to die, he would be looking at very close to £1 million. And in his case, the compensation level as a stage 1 would be between 699,000 and 800,000. So in real terms, he's getting his money repurposed. Call it compensation or call it ongoing payments in a lump sum or whatever way you want to take it. That's what he's getting. So you can see there's a frustration within our community. There's another frustration because a lot of people can't handle a lot of money when they have never had it. And the opportunity to deal with that needs to be supported. That, I take it, is a role, certainly the three societies, the UK, the Scottish and the Northern Irish, will be dealing primarily with Sir Robert Francis to push those issues forward. There has to be, and we've said all along in our questions and our answers to the inquiry requirements, there has to be a process where financial support is not only given, but is supported so that people will be able to handle and make good decisions. I had a meeting yesterday with my board and the Southern Irish board, the Irish Society. Brian O'Mahony, who's the chief executive, was a previous chair of the World Federation of Haemophilia. Brian, very kindly, who's a good colleague of mine, came across from Zurich to attend our meeting and bring members of his board. And we had a very useful day where we're developing and have developed and agreed memorandums of understanding to help develop us because of their experience with their Lindsay inquiry. And we will benefit, as our colleagues in Scotland and England do, in that we all have an MOU together, working with each other on the strengths and weaknesses of our organisations. Brian made it quite clear that during their time, a number of people were not given sufficient advice, were not capable of managing the money, and found that they had either made bad decisions and invested it unwisely, or else they found themselves in a situation where they couldn't cope with the money and they spent it foolishly. The other aspect of this is that, and I cleared this with Colin this morning because I wanted his opinion on this, he and I, and Conan and Paul, are very concerned, as our colleagues are in the other societies, that the lack of, once they stop the process and compensation is paid and you have your relationship with the London-based compensation body, the local attachment that we have relied on with people who talk our own language, with people who are capable of understanding because they're local people, in Colin Murray's case, has been invaluable. And we will lose that. And that's a big concern that he has, not because he wants a job, but because he knows what the job entails. And also what our community want, because a number of widows and families have been heavily relying on the support and the recognition and the understanding of what the process means, and Colin has been in a position to give that because he's a key representative. So it's a concern that we're going to potentially lose that local contact.
Nigel, I'm going to maybe stop you there if that's okay, because I'm conscious that there's quite members probably will want to ask questions, and I don't want to us to run out of time. But that has been very, very helpful.
You, Thank you.
And I know this has been a really, really difficult process, particularly given your own personal experience and your own personal loss, and others like yourself who have been through that. So we're very cognizant of that and how difficult it is. But I think I mean, it's a testament to yourself and the rest of the people that you've been working with to get to this point. Because without your efforts, I don't think it would have been achievable. So I've just a couple of questions, and then I'll open up to some of the other members. And some of this you've kind of alluded to just in your more recent comments that in some of the papers that have been provided to us today. I suppose just in terms of the current scheme that you referenced there, and I know you said about some of it's coming to an end, there's people not registered. So how will that work then in practice? Because if from what you've said there, I'm assuming they have still an opportunity to register and be a part of that scheme. But I know it's time limited, so
there will be an opportunity for people to register with the scheme. In order to do that, they're going to have to develop and design an application form.
It's not even at that stage yet.
It's not. It's easy for those who are registrants currently in the systems. BSO is our system, of course, and we're in a situation where they have all our accounts and all our details, as you'll have seen from the correspondence. So, as Colin has said to me on previous occasions, that once the money comes through and I have access to it, I will notify and it will go straight into people's accounts. And he's further in that correspondence requested additional updates if anyone has changed their accounts, and also advised people if they're on benefits to notify, because they only have to notify under the regulations that has been put in place with the Department of Communities and in the other communities that will not apply against your benefits. But can I just say one thing? And I cite an example of one individual who contacted me, but she represents a number. If the estates, and it's critical that the estates get the right amount of money, if it goes to an estate, it will be up to the executor of the estate to allocate the money. And we know effectively executors have absolute control and absolute power. Many of these estates will need to be revamped, and that will require legal advice and guidance. They will also be in a situation where in some instances there could be contention over the decision made by the executor when the money comes in. And if the executor or others, including the partner of the deceased, decides that they want to give money to the children or to a relative, that money will be taxed. So if someone gives £100,000, it won't be £100,000 that goes. The government will get some of that back in legitimate tax. The opportunity to have the money as a victim or as a spouse will effectively be, or as a sibling or as a child, will effectively be what you're entitled to under the auspices of the compensation process. That's another very important issue that needs local representation and also requires a certain amount of guidance.
Yeah, because it just adds to the complexity of the situation. Extremely. People have got to this point and then are meeting more barriers.
A lot of people think, Chair, that it's come to an end and it's finalised.
Yeah.
It hasn't begun. I've been told by Brian to expect to be working hard for another 5 years to get this sorted. Yeah. They're still working through their tribunal system.
Yeah, well, and that's important for us to know as well, so that whatever we can do to try and support you with that as well, because I mean, as you said, it's been a long road to even get to this stage, and to know that there's lots of things. And I suppose one of the questions I was going to ask was, were you and the others content with the recommendations in regard to compensation? Largely, I sense that you are, but I think there's as you said,
we are, but
things
the
that have
devil's
to
in the
be ironed
detail.
out.
And to be honest, there are a lot of people who thought, oh great, that's the figure I'm getting. I have people asking me, and I have many people asking me, what do I get? What am I entitled to? And I have to go back to the Cabinet Office, and I've got to write to their briefing group and say, look, can you give me some advice on this? And the feedback is, no, it's not up to us. It's going to be up to Sir Robert Francis. Now, we will be meeting with Sir Robert Francis. The number of groups in the UK will be meeting with him. He previously, when he was putting the compensation process together in the architecture of it and his recommendations to the then Cabinet Minister, the opportunity was to meet with him, and he met with a number of key groups. Certainly, as a society, Haemophilia NI, which is the charity for haemophiliacs in Northern Ireland, and also embraces the likes of Marie and others. And what can I say? It was identified that there are another 750 transfusion victims who haven't been registered.
Yeah.
That alone in Northern Ireland. So you can see the complication that is going to develop here. So local experience, local knowledge and local access is absolutely critical. And I can't overstate this. And we're meeting with the new minister. We had Robin, the former minister, very kindly came across at my request with my colleagues. And I had a good chat with him when I was over there. He was due to come to the meeting we had yesterday, but wasn't able to, obviously because of his current status. So We're meeting with the new Minister, Minister Nesbitt. I've requested that, and so has Conan, and we're having a meeting together. We decided to do it separately so that we would try and double impact to make sure one of us got the opportunity. He came back to me this morning and said, look, they've accepted, and then Leslie came through and said, will you accept this? And I said, yes. So we're going to have that meeting if he gives consent to it. I've asked Robin, in his capacity as an MLA and an outgoing minister, to have a word with him and see if he will give us the grace of a meeting at this early stage. Critical at this stage, particularly whenever so much is to be made and set, and we want the Assembly to have their say in this process, not just the victims, but critical to support the victims.
Yeah, I suppose for us, and I mean, we can ask for an update then coming out of that meeting on where the Minister's at, because essentially we'll be looking to him for the leadership on a lot of this stuff too, and we will then hopefully be able to advise and give our views as well, so that we can push it on. My only other question then is, because I am conscious quite a few members will want to ask questions. You made in the briefing papers, and you referenced it as well, Nigel, around duty of candour. Yeah. And it's something that we have been talking about. I mean, how important, in your opinion, do you think legislation around duty of candour would be in preventing something like this happening again?
Well, on the basis that it pervaded the issue of candour and transparency, pervaded political, civil service, medical institutions, it's absolutely critical. Yeah. People need to have confidence, per se, in an assembly. They need to have confidence in what the assembly does and the work that they do. They don't need to know everything at the wrong time, but knowing as much as they can get is critically important. It gives confidence to them and a reassurance that they're being represented. Take that from the macro into the micro. And in the situation we're currently in, it's critical from our point of view that also takes place. Cite my case again. Mild hemophiliac. I then had to go, after I got cancer, I had to go for a liver transplant. For me, that aspect, as much as dealing with the Minister and your former committee chair and vice chair, was a critical factor that I viewed. We were almost in partnership, certainly with my body. They had a partnership with me. I wouldn't let them do anything that I didn't know about. That's my right. And if you take that then and look at it and say, okay, candour is very important, and candour is absolutely important. Openness is important. And a willingness to listen, not tell. We had within the medical profession, we're in charge, we'll tell you. Now that process has adapted and changed largely within the medical profession now. I had a great relationship with my hepatologist and a very good relationship with Gary Benson, the current director for haemophilia in Northern Ireland. And we work together. And as a chair, we as patients will meet with him and his team on a regular basis, and they will come to our events as they would with the UK Society or Paul, and they will work closely with them. So that shared relationship is very important. Opening it up to instill confidence, to instill trust is vital, and candour is absolutely important in relation to political and institutional civil service aspects.
Thank you for that, Nigel. I think that's very important points on that. Okay, then Danny.
Yep, Nigel, and I was delighted that the report had everything in it that you were very, very happy with it, and the recommendations rolled in there. A couple of questions just about: do you feel there was anything that wasn't included in the recommendations that was missed that should be revisited? Is there anything that?
And I'll be honest, I haven't read the whole thing yet. And it's just, I know, it's actually about that size there. The two manuals that we got were, and that was a courtesy, I think, just to say there's something for you in your hand. But even on the day, and my team and Lynn Kelly, we were operating with the same solicitor and barrister team, who were excellent. Mm-hmm. They, two barristers, two solicitors, spent the morning hiving through the information, and there wasn't anything that they had missed relevant to Northern Ireland and our care and our treatment, etc., or Wales. No, I don't think there has been. The one disappointment for us within the inquiry, well, there were two disappointments. We thought all of the chairs thought that Ken Clark got off lightly. That's the truth. I think he could have been sanctioned a little more. I'm not one of those people that wants to go out with cheese wire and stool and hang everybody because they didn't do what you want them to do. But I genuinely think that there could have been a little more sanction on him. His contribution was acknowledged and understood by the judge. And given some of the documents that were available under Griffiths to the inquiry, and to him and to Bloom, the consultant in Wales, quite clearly they made decisions that were based on prejudice. They didn't make decisions that were based on fact. You need to be informed. They were informed, but their decisions were flawed. And that's why a number of people suffered the consequences and are not with us today. So that's the case. The other aspect is in relation to the medical unit here. We have learnt, they have learnt. And that's us in partnership again. They have learnt. And they're moving forward. And that's good. That's good. It doesn't help those people that aren't here. But it does help the rest of us who are. So the transparency and the willingness to understand and help people understand was important. And even to be honest with the minister, the cabinet minister, he cut his time on his flight and said, look, I'll answer your questions. I will answer them entirely to your satisfaction. If that means I have to miss a flight or two, I'll do it. And he did. He did. So we respected that, and that gave us a degree of confidence going into the process. Before, as we knew some of the aspects and elements and timelines of that process that the public didn't know and some of our colleagues didn't, although we shared those when we had his consent.
We've spoken before about your concerns about timelines.
Yeah.
Are you reassured now that the timelines in the bill are okay? Again, the proof of the pie will be in the eating. Sir Robert Francis, in his statement on the government side, was very clear and very concise as to the way he wants to run this. And as being the original architect, he's in a much better position to know how it's going to build than anyone else. So I'm confident that he will do his very best. I mean, as I said, Brian O'Mahony said to me that the inquiry that they had and the tribunal process, etc., for legal appeal, it's still going, and I think this will continue for quite some time. I know that there's a body of staff being built up to develop the process. They've all got to be inducted, they've all got to be trained. We don't want a capita type system, we want a system where they're compassionate. So Robert indicated that compassion and understanding needed to be there, so we're hopeful that he will continue to build those bricks of foundation to make that happen. In respect of the overall timeline, I understand, and I'm referring to compensation for those victims who have to wait and those who are affected victims who have to wait. It will be quite some time. I would say this process will still be sorting through their applications this time next year. So, not to be able to give them some recognition is disappointing. But the timelines are critical. Again, that's where your role as an assembly and as a health committee and as a minister can come into play. The minister will be directly in contact with the Department of Health. The previous minister was extremely helpful in dealing with issues that we raised with him and reassuring us. And those were in relation to Northern Ireland's position within the victims and prisoners legislation. That was going to be my last question. Just what can the minister do? What can the health committee do? And what can we do as MLAs to help to support people?
Okay, good questions. We need a robust system. First and foremost, a robust system that's capable of handling the issues that are brought to you. That requires some consultation with victims. It also requires direct consultation through the appropriate authorities that you would adhere to, Sir Robert Francis. I would like to see the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister take an angle on this. I think it's very important. This was the worst health scandal in the National Health Service. We don't ever want it to happen again.
Thank you, Colin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Danny. I have Diane online.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, technology is not my strong point. Hello, Nigel. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Dan.
I suppose you've already answered in part one of the questions that I wanted to ask, but it is around the duty of candour, because as you say, this was a terrible event in the history of the NHS, terrible on every level that you can imagine. But one of the most awful things about this was the kind of cover up, the lack of information, the frustration of victims, and the length of time that it took to bring dark things into the open. But the duty of candour has also been recommended. I mean, it was recommended after the hyponatremia inquiry in Northern Ireland as well.
Yes.
So what would you like to see in the duty of candour? And should that be Westminster legislation for the whole of the United Kingdom? And should it be wider than the medical profession? So should it be, the civil service are mentioned in these documents as well. So should it be wider than the medical profession as well? And is it better being done at a UK level than at a Northern Ireland level, but that Northern Ireland can be part of it? I just want to know your thoughts on how to do this in the easiest way possible. I'm not looking you to make any political statements about it, but I have asked the previous health minister about this on a number of occasions, and I have never got a sense that they've found a way forward, that either minister or department have found a way forward on this one.
Just Dan, thank you for the question. On the basis that the public inquiry was set up for all victims in the United Kingdom, all victims in each of the regions, and the judge took the opportunity to go around each of those regions. We had ours in 2019 with the public hearings, which were very helpful and very useful, cathartic as well, to give people a chance to express themselves and be heard. I think it's very important that it should be a UK-wide process. I think it needs a serious scrutiny on root and branch within the civil service, within the government, and certainly within the Department of Health. We've identified there are a number of issues in the Department of Health that keep coming out in relation to public inquiries. And even if you consider the situation with the post office, that highlights the fact that decisions, again, not unlike the Ken Clark decisions and the Professor Bloom decisions, were decisions based on judgment. I think that need to be able to judge for yourself sometimes needs to be helped or steered by the legislation. So I think it's important that that is looked at on a regional basis. Scotland have a tendency to do their own thing, and they have the authority in that assembly to be able to do aspects that we just don't do. The same with Wales. So they're all separate animals, but they're all the same as well in the sense that they represent people and people's opinion, and they need to carry that opinion and they need to take that opinion seriously and represent it. So I would like to see the assembly having not only adhere to but influence, as with the other regional assemblies, the opportunity for a very strict and rigid approach to candour, but also a relaxed approach to ensuring that it makes sense and it is practical and it is possible to achieve. Setting aspirations is one thing, making it fact is another.
I think that is one of the most important things going forward. And so on. And the second question I wanted to ask was around the group that supports you from the Department of Health. I probably haven't picked this up correctly, Nigel, but are you saying that the group is no longer there to support you, or that you would like a better, more formalised group with more input to support you?
2 points, Diane, to that question. I perhaps maybe misled you. The Business Services Organisation under Colin Murray provides our monthly and quarterly support in relation to the payments for this initial interim compensation of 210,000. That will come through that organisation from the Department of Health in Northern Ireland through that organisation. When he knows, we will get the green light. The organisation that we have in structure within the Assembly and within the Department of Health, based in the Department's offices, is the Stakeholders Group, which was a request that we made and was acknowledged at the time. Leslie Heaney runs that Stakeholders Group. I had the privilege of chairing the last meeting, and I've requested a further meeting. There are a number of meetings taking place each year, but I've requested a further meeting soon now so that we can go through some of the issues I've raised with you. Leslie contacted us this morning and suggested that there was information they wanted to put on the site. And yes, we would welcome that. But I think also we need also to participate in the process to ensure that again, our views are heard. It appears as though Leslie's team has been winnowed down from 4 to 2, and the guys have gone elsewhere, and I wish them every success. But Leslie's a very adept individual and very capable and extremely good and helpful manager for what we have been working through. I would like to see her being supported more. I'd like to see the team being built up again with the expertise it requires, so that it can deal with the heavy load that is going to outpour in relation to the other issues, not specifically compensation, but the other issues that our community needs to be advised on and guided on. For argument's sake, I'm not in a position, nor is my organisation. We don't have the traction and we don't have the facilities and we certainly don't have the expertise to give financial advice to individuals. I'm not saying that should come from legislation, but that's an example of the sort of experience we need professionals to have. Dealing with the medical profession and dealing with the outpouring of Sir Robert Francis's report and what he or his compensation authority will require implementation in Northern Ireland. That will come through the Assembly. The Department of Health will deal with a lot of that issue. And it's important that, as they do in England and they will in Scotland and Wales, it's important that the Assembly have the opportunity to have sufficient staff to provide. I'm not asking for a cadre of an army. I'm simply saying enough staff. We've gone down to 2. It's very difficult for them to service us, especially with the new developments that have taken place. So that needs to be practical, it needs to be rational. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Nuala?
Thank you. Look, Chair, I don't have a question. I just wanted to come in. Nigel, thank you very much for coming today to present to the committee.
Thank you,
and like you, I wouldn't lie and say I've read every single page of the actual report, but it's helpful that we do have it broken down. I do have a lot of questions for the department, and as a committee, we will be asking that they come forward to the committee so that we can get to the bottom of a lot of the questions that we do have. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to really thank you for coming to present here today and to highlight that it is an issue of importance for us, and that particularly that there's a general election being called, that it won't offset any priority for hopefully any incoming government in the UK, but certainly not for us with regards to being a health committee here. But I just wanted to say thank you for coming today, and that we will obviously of course let you know too how far we get with the health department too, with a lot of the questions that we have. But thank you, Nigel.
Thank you very much, Nuala. I appreciate that. It's encouraging to hear you've done some of your homework anyway. There's a lot to do, but the relevant sections on Northern Ireland are fairly well highlighted, and that gives us an opportunity to focus in context. Can I say to you that in relation to the concerns that you would have or expressed in relation to the election, first and foremost, the election was a bombshell, I think, for most people. Clearly, the choreography of the compassionate government in dealing with the election immediately after they dealt with the public inquiry gave them an opportunity. I'm not being cynical, I'm just being honest. And that again highlights the fact that they had to get that out without the devil and the detail. And now the repercussions are going to follow through. And it's good of them, as Brian said to me yesterday, that they were very generous. And they have been generous. But the reality of it is this government won't be paying it. The next administration will, whoever that's going to be. But timing perhaps for us has been the same as it has been with the Lindsay report in the South and the Lindsay inquiry. So we've benefited from that. I'm glad that you're going to ask questions. That's what we need. We need people who will ask questions, and your committee will be able to put those questions forward for us. And please feel free to keep us informed. I and my other colleagues will certainly take the opportunity whenever required to attend and assist in any way or answer any questions that we can from our perspective.
Thank you, Nigel. I've Alan Robinson. That's it.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Nigel, for the presentation.
Thank you.
And I absolutely extend my apologies to you for the loss of your brother on Christmas Day.
Thank you.
Nigel, you'd said there, and excuse if I'm getting this wrong. Maybe on occasions I maybe do not digest information the way maybe others would. But I just want to understand so that we can develop questions going forward. But you'd said that there was to be an interim payment of £210,000 paid within 90 days. Okay, but there was a number of people that were not yet registered. How many are we talking about? I assume we're talking in the thousands, are we?
Yes, we are across the UK. The Northern Ireland infected community would have been, as we knew it, under the regime of BSO, as registered, would have been, whenever we started this process and the inquiry kicked off in 1718, would have been about 99 individuals and one estate. That has now grown in estates and reduced in individuals because of their demise. Certainly, we have individuals who are infected with hepatitis C, which would be the majority of individuals. And many of those with HIV have passed away. People I knew very well. And as a victim of hepatitis C, another victim of HIV, I can totally empathise with the stigma that they went through and the issues that they had. But you're asking me how many people are registered. In relation to the system we have, everyone who has had or continues to develop in the future hepatitis C or HIV, much more hepatitis C, because of the situation. And there are a number of people who come out of the woodwork. They get registered fairly quickly. So we would have a number of people that as infected victims, it would be almost complete or close to completion. And therefore the £210,000 as a mark of recognition by the government to say, we're sorry, this has happened. We know it's going to take some time, so we're saying we can definitely allocate money to you, and we can go, as the Minister Glenn indicated, no higher than we have to take off people, but certainly there will be a number of people. I was a hepatitis stage 2 victim, others were hepatitis stage 1. We will all get the same payment, and then they will make the change in relation to the full application process. And in our cases, as people registered with BSO, those people who get the 210,000 should be among the first to get their full compensation because they're on the system. Those that are not on the system are going to have to be registered on the system, and because there's an authority, the transfer of that information that we currently have in each of the regions will have to be transferred to the authority, and the applications will have to be completed. That can be done, I would imagine, in the system. But for those who aren't on the system, and I reference 750 transfusion victims in Northern Ireland, and a great deal I cite an example. I know the system's not registered because my mum's not registered. I know the system's not registered because several of my friends who are victims, their families aren't registered, whether it be their children or their siblings. So it will take time to set that process up. So the answer to your question is a great number of people have still to be registered. That could run in the UK, that could run into 30 or 40,000, maybe more. We know that there are about 3,000 victims. In fact, whenever they paid the first contribution as a first interim payment, of which they deduct from the final that they'll be giving along with the 200,000, which is logical and practical and totally accurate, it cost, for I think 3,000 to 4,000 people, it cost some in the region of 410 million, and that was 100,000 each. So if you consider that they're going to make the full payments, the fact that the 10 billion plus figure is a realistic one is important. The other question I have to ask, and it's a question, if you're asking questions, members, then it would be ideal if someone would ask this question. I haven't yet got an answer, but I will be requesting it. Is the 10 billion exclusively for compensation, or does that also include costs of administration, setup of the new body, and does it pay for the time and salaries of the new body? I don't know that. These are all minutiae that are very important, because that takes 10 billion down quite considerably. So there are a lot of questions to be asked and a lot of answers to be given. None of us are in a position to answer all of those, but we can all ask them.
Thanks for that, Nigel.
Okay, thank you.
Good, thank you. Orlia.
Yes, Nigel, thank you so much. It's lovely to see you again. And just whenever you briefed the Health Committee in our planning day, I was taken aback then just at how patiently you speak, how, the detail that you're well across the detail and well versed because you've lived it. And and your poor brother passed away on Christmas Day. But it was a pleasure to meet you a few weeks ago, and I'm delighted that you're here now today, following up with the committee as promised when we spoke the last time. Yes. You also done fabulous on the media, the coverage the other week. I seen you on the TV, on the news outlets as well. So you've done your family and the group very, very proud, just to say that.
Thank you.
So just 2 questions from myself, Nigel, and as Nuala had said, and the chair, we will be more than happy to try and follow up on all of this detail on behalf of yourself and your group to try and get you some answers.
Thank you.
So in terms of, see the oversight and insurance group that you says was in place in Scotland.
Yes.
And I fully agree with you. I think for all of the reasons that you've outlined there, the importance of that group, I don't think can be understated, because this is the start, as you says, of the process. It's not the end.
Absolutely.
And it's how then you go through all the intricacies of people who aren't registered, who haven't been picked up, family members, even getting down to the detail of how much compensation is available and at what point. So on the issue of that sort of specific oversight group, conscious that you said you were meeting the minister, or you've requested to meet with the minister, yes. Has this been raised?
The initial request, but
the initial request is in.
Yes.
Has that issue been raised locally with the previous health minister? Would the department be aware of this request coming in?
No, it hasn't, and this would be a request specifically on the back of the issues concerning the compensation process, and also matters of candour and other ideals that have come out as recommendations from the inquiry. All well put and well placed. I would say to you, thank you very much for your comments in relation to the press. I appreciate that. I think in the 2 days I did something like 17 interviews. I was leaving from Stephen Nolan's programme after I'd done 3 before that, and then I was answering the phone in the taxi, and that was a press. It was the Irish Times wanted to interview, so they did that, and then I went on to the BBC and whatever. Look, it's part of the course. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow it could be chip paper, but today it's not. It's the chips. Mm-hmm. And as far as I'm concerned, for each person who had the opportunity to speak, it's important that we get out a consistent and a persistent message, mm-hmm. and that's what we've tried to do. I don't expect it. Let me draw the analogy. I drew this before. Let me draw the analogy. If I see myself as Wyatt Earp, I'm not leaving the guns down and putting them at the bottom of the bed until the job's done. Full stop. So they stay loaded until I'm in a position to ensure that I don't need to be there to exact the law. We need to make sure that this is done properly, mm-hmm. because it's the only time we're going to get that for all our members.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely, Nigel. And just my second and final question was in terms of the psychological support. So you have mentioned then that obviously the support was maybe scaled back or centralised within the haemophilia centre, but that didn't include transfusion victims and their families. So could you just elaborate a wee bit on that, just so we can, when we're writing off to the department, we can be as specific as
I would
possible?
like assistance on this. Certainly the 3 of us would, because Conan's raised this himself whenever we were discussing the issue and he was putting his paper together. The reality of it is that haemophilia is a very specialist requirement. And we have 2 units. One operates in the Royal, which is the children's, and one operates with a consultant, both consultants, but the leading consultant is the adults, and that's in the city. Used to be together in the Royal, moved the adults to the city. The advice and help will be given to young families who need psychological support when they discover they have a haemophiliac, and the likely impacts that will be much better now than it used to be in my day or my grandfather's day. But that advice will be given primarily to haemophiliacs and haemophiliac families to support and encourage them. The same way as we have a social worker in that unit, the same way as we have a physiotherapist in that unit, etc., etc. So we need to ensure that it's not all about haemophilia. Mm-hmm. It's easy to brand the issue as a haemophiliac issue because they have had a blood problem and said, yes, that's true. And we recognise that is an easy way to carry it. In the south, it was transfusions. It was females with transfusions. It happened also to haemophiliacs, but that was the focus. So, and that was usually as a result of birth and the need for additional blood. The problem is, if it's haemophilia, it is more likely to be haemophilia. I want priority given to those who are victims. All victims, not just haemophiliacs. We're looked after very well. It's those people who are just off gauge on the system, who aren't. They need support. They need encouragement. They need to be advised, and good advice needs to be given. And there are a lot of them who they haven't come out of the woodwork yet. You know.
Well, you've been a great voice for them, even speaking here today and raising that issue. So thank you, and making us aware of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alan Chambers.
Thank you, Chair. Nigel, I don't have any questions for you, but I just want to make some comments. I think that this situation that has been exposed is going to go down as one of the most disgraceful stains on the history of the United Kingdom. And I know all the apologies at the very highest level have been made. The hands have been put up in the air to take responsibility. And many claims that we must never allow something like this to happen again. But I think that you're concerned in what you've been telling us today that there could be a lot of potential hurdles in front of you before you can put your wide herp guns away.
Yeah.
And if that happens, if there are any more hills created for you to climb, it just is going to diminish all the apologies and the government actions to date. So it is absolutely vital that there are no more hills created for you to climb.
Yes.
And certainly I look forward as a member of this committee to working with you going forward to try and avoid that.
Thank you very much, Alan. I appreciate that. And I want to come back to you on a couple of things. One of the ways to ensure that such a stain doesn't happen again is through candour, is through process, and is through accountability. That has been something that was missing for many years until, and deliberately so in some instances, across the piece, until it was developed. You know, I'll tell you in Northern Ireland, the two reasons why they said they couldn't follow through in detail. They blamed the Troubles, and they also blamed the lack of consistent administration. That's where the focus was, and it wasn't on us. That's an excuse. That's an excuse. We were still getting treated, and during that time we were getting treated very well, and maybe not so well. But we were getting treated. The system continued. The health service was running. Throughout that time, there were pressures on the system. The fact of the matter is, they didn't adapt and deal with the issue as they needed to deal with it, full stop. They're dealing with it now. Those aren't the issues. We have major waiting lists. We have major delays in people getting put into wards. We have major delays in relation to ambulance service. We have shortage of doctors. We have shortage of nurses. I'm not focusing that as an accusation against anyone. Those are the circumstances. So you can adapt the circumstances to suit the argument. That has been done. The reality of it is there are basic needs and citizens' rights that should not be abandoned. And to attempt to deal with those in a slipshod way is abandonment. Principle, if not money, principle should guide through. And where it's necessary, it shouldn't happen.
Okay, and Danny, you wanted to come in just on a small question before we finish?
Just a tiny question. The 750 transplant patients you mentioned, I'm a bit confused as to why they're not registered. Obviously, being transplant patients, they're already in the system. You know, they're known about. So why are they not already?
Some of that, Danny, can be down to the fact that some of them have received hepatitis B. And can I say, in relation to Alan's question and your other colleagues, Chair, the identification of individuals primarily has been focused on those infected who are hepatitis C and who are hepatitis HIV. Those other groups, many of those, and the only recognition, not in the system currently, but in the system to come under this new compensation authority, which Sir Robert is chairing, will recognise, because of the recommendations by the public inquiry and Sir Brian, they will recognise those with hepatitis B, because they weren't being recognised. So I dare say some of that cadre will fall into that funnel.
Okay, Nigel, thank you very much. I mean, there's certainly a lot to unpick, and I think that's something that we're probably very quickly realising, you know, with the information that's been provided, but as well as just the discussion today. I think we were all fairly relieved whenever the inquiry was concluded, and we're on it. We kind of have a road to go in terms of what can and will be done. And I mean, certainly that's what we want to support, to make sure that happens as smoothly as possible for the likes of yourself, as you said, for the infected and the affected community, because it is more than those people who have been directly impacted, and that is something that's come through very strongly, just even from speaking to yourself. So as I said, I would like to continue this engagement with yourself, whether it's, you know, you just contacting us as members of the committee to keep us updated on any barriers, any issues you're facing, so that we can be asking the questions. And as I said, I mean, happy to meet with you at any stage, you know, outside of the committee as well, because as others have said, this is probably one of the biggest scandals, probably not the right word. It is a scandal, but I mean, I think it's even bigger than that in our time, in our lifetimes. And I hope we never ever see something like this again. So I think we've a lot of work to do, but you know, we're keen to support you and others as best we can. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Sure, I appreciate that, and I take on board what you say. We certainly, my colleagues and myself, my organisation and theirs, will be more than happy to assist in any way or answer any questions we can. What we can do is we can give you a victim's perspective. That's important when you're providing a service. And we will keep you fully informed of what goes on and how things develop. And I will take you up on your opportunity to have a discussion with you. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you
all very much.
All the best now.
Thank you.
Okay, members, I suppose there's quite a lot coming out of that. We probably will have lots to follow up on. I suppose just one suggestion I would make is particularly around the duty of candour issue. I think that's something, I mean, there's a lot of inquiries and issues that will be relevant to. So I suppose in the first instance I would suggest that we could maybe request from research on duty of candour in what policies we have currently here, and I suppose wider than that to look at. I think this is going to be something that we will be focusing on the time ahead. I know, Diane, you'd raised it as well the day that the inquiry was concluded. Do you want to come in there? At you now.
God, sorry. So yes, I did raise it that day. It's just I think we need to understand the extent of the duty of candour that the inquiry talked about, because it's certainly a duty of candour that is wider than just one profession. So I would like us to have a look at that and a think about that. But I suppose the other thing I would like us to do is just to formally write to the Health Minister to understand that, given that we didn't have time to lay an LCM, that Northern Ireland is fully included in the bill.
Well, that I was just going to provide an update on that, Diane.
Okay.
So I've been advised that the Victims Prisoners Bill has passed in Westminster, and that that we are included in the provision relating to the infected blood scheme. So that's, the department won't be laying the LCM in the Assembly because we are included in that. And I've been told then the department will be writing to the committee to provide an update on this that we should receive hopefully within the next week. So hopefully by our meeting next week we'll have further clarity on that. So that's that. But we can ask, I think, if members are happy enough with the suggestion, to ask for to make a research request in terms of duty of candour policies and try and get a bit of a scope for it. Because I know it'll certainly tie in with one of our committee priorities around accountability. And I think it's a very, very critical one. So Alan, you're happy enough there. Alan's clapping me there, so you're happy enough for that. Okay. Sorry, Danny.
Can I just ask, just in relation to the question that Nigel had raised there, just about the 10 billion, including the costs of the administration costs, is there any way we could feed that into him? It's clearly something that's very important to him. Could we try and get some clarity on that for him? Yeah. I know he said that he's had no luck getting any result on that question. It would be something obviously that would be very important. But
no, I think, and there's probably a whole raft of stuff that we will want to get clarity in, but that's a key one. Yeah. So we'll forward the correspondence we received then.
So the stuff that we've received, then we can forward on to the department and get a response on it as well.
So that's probably the best one. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, we are slightly over time on that part. So item number 6 then, we now will have a departmental briefing on the strategy for stopping domestic and sexual violence and abuse in Northern Ireland. We have a briefing paper at tab 6 of your pack, page 960. So just wait. You're all very welcome. In attendance today we have Eilish McDaniel, Director of Family and Children's Policy, Astrid Hamilton, Joint Head of the Adoption Children Act Implementation Team, and Lindsay Armstrong, Head of Child Protection, Domestic and Sexual Abuse Unit. So you're all very welcome today. We have about 45 minutes for this session. I know we kind of went over time, so appreciate your patience as well for coming today. I suppose just before we open, and I know we've been in contact with the department, we were hoping to get the new strategy. We are aware the Justice Committee have been provided with the document, so I suppose just from the outset we are very disappointed, and it's no reflection on yourselves, but it's just it would have been helpful if we had that as well, so we could look at that. But what I would say that when that is available, we probably would like to have you back if that's okay.
Absolutely, and I just want to start by giving my apologies for the fact that you didn't receive the papers in advance. It's got something to do with the change of minister and that, and it just hasn't been possible to get the papers cleared in time. So apologies again for that.
Okay, no problem, Eilish, thank you. So it could be potentially a wee bit brief for them maybe we initially anticipated, because obviously we're talking about the old strategy at this stage, but as I said, we've about 45 minutes, so we have a briefing paper if you have anything to add then to that, and then we'll open up for questions. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to brief the committee on the new draft 7-year domestic and sexual abuse strategy. I'm accompanied by Astrid Hamilton, who's the former head of Child Protection, Domestic and Sexual Abuse Unit, and Lindsay Armstrong, who's the current head of the unit in the department. I'm going to repeat my apologies again to members that you didn't receive the papers in advance. At this stage, what that means in effect, at this stage, the strategy, the associated action plan and the performance framework haven't been approved by the Health Minister, but we can give you a general sense of what the drafts of each of those documents contains at this stage, and the drafts have been approved by the Justice Minister. Before I turn to the new strategy, I want to take the opportunity to touch on some of what we consider to have been the most notable successes of the previous strategy, but also to outline some of the challenges over the course of the last 8 years that have been experienced. Operation Encompass is an initiative that allows police to share information with education settings where there's been domestic abuse involving a child, and to date there have been around 25,000 referrals by the police to schools across Northern Ireland. In making a referral, the intention is to enable schools to offer immediate support to children experiencing domestic abuse. We piloted what is called the ARIS project in a number of GP practices, and ARIS stands for Identification and Referral to Improve Safety. And the aim of that project is to ensure that general practitioners both recognise and respond to domestic and sexual abuse and refer patients to specialist advocacy support where it is required. And this has involved providing training to GPs and their practice staff. In relation to advocacy services, we've engaged the services of Assist NI, which provides advocacy support for victims of domestic and sexual abuse across Northern Ireland. This is from short-term engagement to full advocacy, helping victims navigate their way through often confusing and traumatic criminal justice processes. A range of training and awareness programmes have been rolled out, and a suite of new legislation introduced which creates new offences and better support and protection for victims. Legislation that has been introduced includes a new domestic abuse offence introduced in 2022, criminalising a pattern of non-physically abusive behaviour, protection from stalking legislation, which may also be outside a domestic or family context, as well as the Justice Northern Ireland Act of 2022, which provides for new offences of upskirting, downblousing, non-fatal strangulation, and preventing the so-called rough sex defence. We included provision in the Adoption and Children Act, which became law in April 2022, to amend the definition of harm in the Children Order 1995. Harm under the Children Order will, when the relevant provision is commenced later this year, include cases where a child is adversely impacted by domestic abuse, even if they haven't seen, heard, or been present when the abuse took place. And this amendment will bring the definition of harm in the Children Order more in line with the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act of 2021. Residence and contact orders under the Children Order will be impacted by the new definition of harm. So in future, when considering whether to make a residence or a contact order, the court will be under a duty to consider whether the child has suffered or is at risk of suffering harm as a result of the ill treatment of another person by the person seeking contact or wanting the child to live with them, and that's regardless of whether the child saw, heard, or was present when that harm occurred. Where legislation has already been brought forward, including by the Department of Justice, we've ensured that health and social care staff have been informed of the legislation and can avail of training where that is necessary. These are what we consider to have been the key achievements. Others are set out in the briefing paper that we sent to committee a number of weeks ago. They were also reflected in the annual progress reports that have been published throughout the lifetime of the strategy. The previous strategy was delivered in partnership across government departments, between departments and statutory partners, and in conjunction with the voluntary and community sector, which played a critical role in implementation. It's intended that a new 7-year cross-departmental domestic and sexual abuse strategy will run from 2024 to 2031. And as with the previous strategy, the new strategy was developed jointly by the Department of Health and Justice, working in collaboration with the Department for Communities, the Department of Education, and the Executive Office. And it's also intended that implementation of the new strategy will be taken forward in conjunction with statutory partners, the police, probation, the PBS, social services, education bodies, and with the voluntary and community sector. Funding has been and remains a challenge, although investment in tackling domestic and sexual abuse is much greater than that directly allocated to implement the strategy. And while we acknowledge that funding is a challenge, we've not let it inhibit either our strategic aims or action planning under the new strategy. We think we've developed an ambitious action plan for the next 3 years. And while everything in the plan may not be achievable within that 3-year period, we consider that it's important to capture actions that will help us achieve our strategic ambitions and deliver what we know needs to be done. Additional funding would enable us to do more, so much more, and to act more quickly. But we need to be realistic about the current financial environment that all of us are operating within. So why did we decide to develop a new strategy at all? Domestic and sexual abuse are systemic problems rooted in power imbalances, societal norms and cultural attitudes that perpetuate violence and silence victims. This abuse manifests in various forms. It can be physical, emotional, psychological and financial, and affects individuals regardless of their age, their gender identity, their ethnicity, their race or socio-economic status. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 3 women worldwide has experienced either physical or sexual intimate partner violence or non-partner sexual violence in their lifetime. And these statistics are not just numbers, they represent human lives marred by pain and fear. The repercussions of domestic and sexual abuse extend far beyond the immediate physical injuries. Victims often endure long-term psychological trauma, including depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. The economic impact is also significant, as survivors may face loss of employment, financial instability, and housing insecurity. Children who witness or experience abuse are at higher risk of developing behavioural and emotional problems, perpetuating a vicious cycle of violence. In Northern Ireland, in the 12 months to the end of December 2023, there were more than 33,000 domestic abuse incidents responded to by the police, and nearly 21,000 domestic abuse crimes recorded by police. 69% of victims of domestic abuse crimes were female, 31% were male. 83% of offenders were male and 14% were female. Tragically, there were 3 murders with a domestic abuse motivation between the 1st of January and the 31st of December 2023. 2 of the victims were female, 1 was male. Also, in the 12 months to the end of February 2024, sexual abuse crime accounted for almost 4% of all 4% of all police recorded crime, and there were more than 4,000 sexual offences recorded by police. The draft strategy articulates the vision in the following terms. Northern Ireland is a place where domestic and sexual abuse are not tolerated, and everyone can be safe and free from fear. Domestic and sexual abuse are everyone's business, making partnership work and collaborative approaches necessary, and the voice of victims, including children and young people, is both valued and central to decision making. To support delivery of that vision, the strategy is structured around 5 pillars. The first is partnership, driving change through joint commitment, leadership and partnership working. The second is prevention, preventing domestic and or sexual abuse from happening by challenging the attitudes and behaviours that foster it and intervening early where that's possible to do. A children and young people pillar is the third pillar, preventing domestic and or sexual abuse from happening and ensuring children and young people who are victims are seen and heard and can access services and receive support, helping them to recover and taking account of their particular needs. The fourth pillar is a support and provision pillar, ensuring that all victims of domestic and or sexual abuse can access tailored, responsive and specialised support and provision to recover and rebuild their lives. And then finally, a justice pillar, ensuring justice responses are effective, supporting victims and holding individuals who are abusive to account at the earliest possible opportunity. So the 5 pillars I've just referred to are the foundation upon which the vision is based, and each pillar is expressed in terms of 1 or more outcomes. So there are 10 outcomes in total in the strategy. The outcomes then are then translated into key priority areas, so they're the things that we consider we need to focus on in order to deliver the outcomes we're trying to achieve. We've also developed an integrated performance framework, and under the framework we've identified a range of indicators and measures for each of the outcomes, and that's intended to help us gauge and evaluate whether the strategy is having the impact that we have set out to achieve. The intention is that delivery of the strategic outcomes would be supported by a range of associated action plans, starting with the publication of an initial 3-year action plan alongside the strategy. In the 3-year draft action plan, we tried to identify challenging but realistic actions across the 5 pillars of the strategy. And where possible, the actions have been costed, although it's acknowledged that in some cases initial scoping and preparatory work would need to be progressed in order to calculate the resource requirements more accurately. As we progress implementation of the strategy, further action plans would be developed, building on earlier actions where necessary and developing new actions as appropriate. And that would require us to take account of the performance up until that point. The initial action plan would be reviewed at the midpoint and also at the end point to assess its impact and its effectiveness and any emerging issues and to inform the development of subsequent action plans. In order to develop the strategy, we undertook significant engagement with key stakeholders and those with lived experience of domestic and or sexual abuse. There was a joint call for views that was launched together with TEO in January 2022 to inform the development of both the new domestic and sexual abuse strategy and TEO's equally safe strategy to end violence against women and girls. There was a significant response to the call for views, which is reflective, I suppose, of the considerable interest and importance in tackling these issues. We received 91 written responses and 661 online surveys were completed. Views were also shared at 22 stakeholder engagement events and 5 public events. We listened to and spoke to victims, frontline services, including those who support victims. A number of key themes arose from the call for views. So, for example, many responses noted that prevention and early intervention is key to tackling domestic and sexual abuse. Many asked for improvements to the criminal justice system, streamlining and simplifying the process, and many felt that service provision and support could be strengthened. The issues raised during the call for views helped to inform the development of the new draft strategy, which was launched for public consultation in February 2023. And we received 90 written responses to consultation, and views were also shared at 5 public events where we engaged further with victims and frontline service practitioners. Responses broadly agreed with the draft vision of the strategy, the definitions of domestic and sexual abuse, and suggested that the outcomes and key priority areas set the right direction of travel. However, a number of areas for improvement were highlighted, and we subsequently revised the strategy to address the points that had been raised, and that includes the development of the performance framework that I've just referred to. And we also developed and included a children and young persons pillar to address the concerns that children and young people needed to be more visible in the strategy. The draft strategy acknowledges its connection and interdependency with the TEO-led Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, and it's recognised that it will support delivery of outcomes against that strategy, particularly given that women and girls are disproportionately affected by domestic and sexual abuse, and I've reflected that in the statistics that I quoted at the start of the session. However, domestic and sexual abuse is not limited to women and girls, and so the response under this strategy is intended to be gender inclusive and to encompass all those affected by it, irrespective of their age, their race, their gender identity, their sexual orientation, ethnicity and background, and whether or not they have a disability, for example. Nonetheless, the 2 strategies are intended to complement each other and to be mutually reinforcing. As we progress implementation, we would continue to work collaboratively with TEO to avoid duplication and to ensure that an aligned, joined-up, comprehensive response to domestic and sexual abuse and to violence against women and girls more broadly is delivered. The strategy also acknowledges the need for funding and notes that associated action plans will include indicative delivery costs where these are known. In 23-24, funds of around 1.6 million were allocated for cross-departmental delivery of outcomes under the previous strategy, although, as I've already said, that doesn't represent the totality of expenditure by departments on domestic and sexual abuse in Northern Ireland. A strategy delivery board, which was an implementation oversight mechanism led jointly by the Departments of Health and Justice, agreed how this funding was to be allocated across departments, taking into account a range of factors, including priorities that have been agreed with ministers, alignment with strategic objectives, statutory and contractual commitments, and also impact for victims. And as you're aware, the budget for the current financial year and future years has not yet been confirmed. On the assumption that the same allocation of 1.6 million is received, the plan is that a strategy oversight board would consider bids against the available budget and the same range of factors, and then make recommendations for allocations to be agreed by ministers. It's important to note that the anticipated 1.6 million will not be sufficient to cover everything set out in the action plan, and some initial prioritisation will be required. Similar governance arrangements would be put in place to oversee implementation of the strategy, again led jointly by the Departments of Health and Justice, with representation from TEO, the Department of Education for Community and the Department for Communities. An expert reference group would be established to which the Strategic Oversight Board would routinely make reference over the course of the lifetime of the strategy, and we would ensure that victims and survivors continue to be front and centre. The intention is also to continue to report to the Northern Ireland Executive and the Assembly committees throughout implementation. Just want to thank you for the opportunity to brief committee today. I hope that was helpful in the absence of more detailed papers. We're happy to take any questions that members may have.
Thank you. There's probably a lot to take in, but I appreciate you're trying to get as much of that across to members as possible in the absence of the paper. So we, as I say, we may have to come back to it at another stage. But I have a couple of questions, and I suppose I was largely basing on the briefing paper that we do have. But some of those figures are probably, I mean, even some of the figures around Encompass have been updated again. I think it was 18,000 left. You've said it's now up to 25,000. So
it's 25,000 from the introduction of Encompass in pilot form. Between May 23 and May 24, it was 18,000 notifications.
Okay, thank you for clarifying, because I thought then maybe it was a wee bit outdated, but no, that makes sense. So thank you for that. I suppose just to say on Encompass, I feel it's been one of the most important pieces of work that we've ever seen in relation to domestic violence and children, and it shows the value of really good partnership working for children going into school and what they've maybe experienced. So I suppose just to make a comment on that. So I'm glad that it's now something that will be further rolled out, because I think it's so important.
I think it's in around 1162 settings, I think, Encompass is already within, and that includes preschools, schools, colleges, and some training and facilities for pupils under the age of 18. We're working with the EA at the minute. By we, I mean the Department of Health is working with the EA to try and then get it rolled out into non-statutory preschool provision too.
Yeah, and I think it is certainly, because one of the schools that was piloted was in my own area, I think in Clough-Rea, was one of the schools that were included, and it really emphasised just how much of this is hidden, and children going to school every single day, and probably in the same class as some of our own children and things like that, and nobody really knows. So obviously they still won't know, but at least we have a confidence that someone will be made aware, and the proper supports can be put in place, and that there's proper monitoring of it. So anything that can be done to prevent harm and hopefully prevent situations escalating, because I'm very conscious, and something we've talked about a lot, particularly from COVID and the cost of living crisis that many families, we're all seeing, but it has been particularly difficult for many families. The impact that can have on the home situation has undoubtedly had an impact on cases like this coming to the fore. So, and it ties in well. I know Eilish, you've done a lot of work on the review of children's social services as well. So it ties in around that whole family support piece and trying to get family support in at the earliest possible stage, and I think this is something that will link in really, really well with that. So it's just to make those comments.
Just to add, the EA has launched a project evaluation on Operation Encompass, and has sought responses from the designated teachers in the statutory education settings, and so far the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, as you might expect. So they're currently analysing some of those responses with a view to kind of understanding how the delivery has worked so far, and determine whether any further action is required in terms of rollout.
It'll be good then, once that's complete, that we get an update on that as well, because I think it is something that we all are very interested in. You've mentioned the funding situation, and I think at this stage, particularly with the budget debate this week, we are really very aware of how challenging that is, and the impacts that will be potentially coming down the line. But I suppose, given the issue around the core grant funding programme, and I know certainly from working with groups like Women's Aid, just the huge impact not having that funding has had, not only on the loss of funding, of that funding specifically, but the impact of being able to access other funding streams then, because that gives other funders the confidence in terms of funding an organisation, because they have that track record. Is there any update on that, or is it something that's being looked at now with an income, in the new budgetary period? Because we can have all of these strategies, but if we're not funding the organisations who are on the front line delivering the services, I know certainly I can speak from my own area, Women's Aid Armagh. I was at their 40th anniversary conference there a month or two ago, and I know that the number of referrals is just continuing to increase. The challenge is they have recruiting staff, because obviously if they're not getting a salary that's sustainable for their household, it's not very attractive. People love the job, but we have to be real. You know, we have to live in the real world of what we can offer people to deliver a very, very critical job, which is a very, very difficult one. And that's only one element of it, but recruitment obviously is a key part of being able to deliver that service. So core funding is absolutely crucial, and if they're not able to access that, that's going to have a massive impact on being able to deliver this strategy and meeting the aims and objectives. So if there's any, I know it's maybe it's a wee bit up in the air, but if you can give any comment on that, because I know it's a huge issue, particularly for the likes of Women's Aid in respect of this.
I mean, I want to acknowledge that it has been very difficult for the 62 organisations that have been impacted by the decision last year to cut funding by 50%, and the reasons for that are well recorded. I think in terms of what happens this year, that decision is still outstanding, and it's a matter for the new Minister Chair. While I don't want to minimise the impact on the Women's Aid Federation, I absolutely don't want to do that. I just want to assure the committee that the department continued to fund Women's Aid projects across Northern Ireland. So I think there was something like £700,000 of funding allocated to Women's Aid projects, and that was in keeping with the department's position that it wanted to protect frontline services. So I'm not minimising the impact on the Federation at all, but I just wanted to make it clear to members that we didn't withdraw funding from those frontline services.
No, absolutely, and I think, I suppose it's really just that it's more around the stability and the certainty for the likes of Women's Aid, and the core grant programme is crucial. So I suppose obviously there are other elements of funding and things like that, and it's just trying to get that more concreted in, really, is what I'm saying, because it's just a very challenging picture all over, and I suppose with it being an executive priority around violence against women and girls, and we'd hope that this can be overcome and that we can find a more stabilised way forward for those organisations and others. I mean, I recently met with Hourglass NI as well, and I know they provide really, really good support and are doing great work around abuse in older people as well, which will encompass domestic violence as well in older people, which can sometimes be more hidden too. So there are other groups, maybe not specific to core grant, but just who will require funding support too. Just one or two other things then from your paper and from your opening comments. You mentioned the IRIS programme, and I know there was 54 GP practices were involved in that. And again, like Encompass, the more agencies, the more people who are tuned into the signs and how they can identify potential abuse is crucial. And I think it would be good to know if there is any sort of evaluation on that work. And any plans in terms of rolling that out further, or is it going to remain in those 54 practices? And also very conscious of the huge pressures on GP practices. Is that likely to have an impact? Because we're all very aware, and we've had the Royal College of GPs and the BMA into committee of the difficulties in people accessing their GPs. So have we any kind of data or information around the impact in that, where potentially things could be picked up, but if someone's not able to get into their GP because of the capacity issues? I know that's quite a lot of questions rolled into one, but you kind of get the gist of where I'm going with it, how that could impact in another opportunity to pick up on abuse.
I think IRIS is another good example of work that we've done on a pilot basis, and the aim is to ensure that GPs and their practice staff are able to not only recognise domestic abuse, but also be able to and have the confidence, I suppose, and the skill to be able to respond to it. There's a second element to it, which involves giving GPs a specialist referral pathway. So there will be an advocate educator associated with as part of the model and linked to the different projects that exist. actually that advocate educator is located with Women's Aid, just to make that point. But it gives somewhere for GPs to go for patients who need that bit of additional specialist support. You're right, it's in 54 practices, 29 of them I think are in Belfast and 25 are in Newrymore and Down district. The pilot has been subject to evaluation. It has been evaluated well, and it is something that we have been looking at rolling out, and we've tried to cost that up. So I think the estimated cost sort of the order of £440,000 to be able to roll it out across GP practices across Northern Ireland. Again, not without challenge at all. A lot of these things have been good things to do on a pilot basis. Rolling them out where money is required is going to be more of a challenge for us.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. I suppose maybe it's maybe something that can be looked at, but in comparison to the cost of dealing with the issues, if this isn't in place, it may be one way of weighing that up as well, because if we are dealing with things at the other end of the scale where victims are experience a very high level of abuse because it has gone on unnoticed, or they haven't been in contact with various professionals who have had the skills to pick it up, the consequences are far greater, and in terms of cost then we're probably at a different scale. But it would be good then to kind of get more information on that as that progresses as well, Eilish, because it's something I'm very interested in. The other thing that was mentioned as well in the briefing was the MARAC review, but I'm not sure where that's at, so if you're able to give an update on that, it would be very useful.
So there was a review done of the MARAC process, and MARAC, just by way of a very short explanation, is a process whereby high-risk victims of domestic abuse are considered on a multi-agency basis to enable the risk to be assessed and planning to be put in place. The review has indicated very clearly that the process does need to be updated, and we will work with the Department of Justice to consider exactly how that needs to be done. Julie Wilson and I, Julie's from the Department of Justice, and we met with Marcella Leonard, who undertook the review just a couple of weeks ago, and Marcella's view is, and it's reflected in the review report anyway, that we do a lot of information sharing, so it's a really effective information sharing mechanism. However, there needs to be built around that information sharing better assessment, better analysis, better planning, better reviews of planning, and I think our other view was that we needed better coordination within the process too. So Marcella has set out very clearly, I think, for us what she considers we need to do. We'll work alongside the Department of Justice, and I think the intention now is to establish a task and finish group to consider what we need to do next. Just to add to that, we've also been looking at other models of practice, for example, within Leeds Local Authority, and we have some officials from Leeds Local Authority coming across to Northern Ireland on the 10th and 11th of June, just to take us through their model of practice. So for example, they've got a multi-agency front door. They have what they call DRAMs, daily risk assessment meetings that take place. They look at all cases of domestic abuse that have come to the attention of police within the last 24 hours, and they're discussed on a daily basis. What that means is that there can be more immediate responses to those individuals. It could take as long as 3 weeks, for example, for somebody to come before a MARAC conference. So that delay in itself, I think, is quite significant. So we will work with the Department of Justice to see what we need to do next in MARAC terms, but I just want to assure you that we're also looking at other mechanisms that exist elsewhere with a view possibly to to doing some of that in Northern Ireland. Lindsay, you attended with Observer Status one of the DRAM meetings recently.
Yes,
do you want to say anything about that?
Yes, so it was a very useful meeting, and it was multi-agency, and it meant that there were immediate responses, and as Eilish has said, it avoids the delay in waiting for the MARAC conference.
No, that's good. That's good to know as well, and we can suppose hopefully then, when the task and finish group set up, we can see kind of where that's going to head as well. So thank you for that. The last 2 points then, just I wanted to raise. Sorry, just one actually. The domestic violence perpetrator programme in Derry, that was in the briefing paper as well. I would be keen to get if there's any feedback on that and how effective it was. I suppose given some of the very high profile cases we've heard of recently, I'm thinking of Kiva Morgan that we heard of this week, and her murderer had a history also of domestic violence. Jonathan Cresswell is another case that we've heard of, and I suppose what I'm saying is there's certainly a lot of merit in where people have been involved, where there's perpetrators, that any work that can be done around reoffending should be done, and it would be good to kind of get some feedback on that, because it's one element of tackling this, and you know, it's an epidemic, I suppose, is what you said, because I think there's hardly a week goes by now that we're not hearing a case here in the north. I think you'd said, Eilish, there's 3 murders in last year alone. Yeah. And that doesn't take into account all of the other cases of where this has happened. So if there's anything that you have on that, I would be keen to hear that.
Nothing about the court itself. I do need to follow that up with the Department
of
Justice,
Department of
for
Justice,
you.
Yeah.
So we will find out a bit more about that for you. One thing that it probably should bring to your attention is a programme that works in each of the 5 trusts. It's a PBNI run programme funded by the Department of Justice. It's a promoting positive relations programme, and it's designed to work with men who are potentially abusive in intimate partner relationships, but there are also concerns about their children. So social services may consider that their children are at risk, and while the individual is going through the programme, there will be a support worker then allocated to his partner to ensure that they're supported through the process too. Now, that's something, again, if there was more funding available, that we would like to do more of, because it has been really quite successful. So we'll find out about the Derry Court for
that
you.
Would be great.
But that's another example, I think, of trying to work with individuals to change behaviours.
If I could just add, I'm aware that court is no longer running, but there are now domestic violence contest courts. As I understand it, there's been one so far. The prosecution and the victims and witnesses were in the remote evidence centre in Belfast, and as I understand, there's more scheduled for September and November of this year.
Okay, thank you for that, Lindsay. Okay, sorry, members, I know I went on a wee bit, but there's quite a lot on that. Avnula?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Eilish and team, for coming today. I'm just going to get straight into questions, and some of them will be following on from the previous questions from the Chair. Just put on record also, I am a member of the Policing Board, and I sit in the Performance Committee, and we regularly, I think every quarter, get updates specifically around domestic violence and sexual violence, and specifically around MARAC and Operation Encompass too. So a lot of my questions are going to really focus on that, because whilst the Policing Board was able to actually run whenever there was no assembly, the Health Committee hasn't, so there's been a lot of unanswered questions, you know, not your fault, of course, over the past while. I just want to then we'll start with MARAC. I understand that there may be organisations who perhaps aren't completely aligned with what the review is saying, in terms of satisfied with what it says. So I just wondered if you could have a little bit of feedback around consultation with regarding the review of MARAC, and if you ever anticipate that will actually be put on a statutory footing. So that's my first 2 questions.
Okay, so exactly who was involved in the review, Nuala, I'm not absolutely certain, but I know that the Health and Social Care Trust, for example, were consulted as part of the review process. I mean, we can find out for you exactly who was involved in the review. I think there is a piece of work to be done to consider Marcella's report in detail, taking into account the views of others, like Health and Social Care Trusts, for example, to ensure that whatever decision we arrive at in terms of a new process, and I think we will arrive at a new process at some stage in the future. I think it's important that all of those views are taken into account. So the Task and Finish group that I've referred to, it will be important for us to ensure that all of the relevant partners are part of that Task and Finish group arrangement, so that all of their views can be made known and taken into account. Marcella did recommend that the new process is put on a statutory footing, and again, that's one thing that we will need to consider as part of the Task and Finish group work, whether in fact that will absolutely be necessary. I do think there might be other solutions too, like, for example, the DRAM arrangement that I've just referred to. So I think we do need to look at what else exists out there that is working and is working effectively, and make a decision about where MARAC lies in connection with that. So I think the Task and Finish group needs to do its work first, Nuala, and I suppose we can come back to committee, as the chair has asked, with the outcome of that process.
And what about Women's Aid? Will they be engaged when it comes to?
Absolutely, and other partners too. For example, the Men's Advisory Project, I think, should also be part of that process.
Mm-hmm. And just so it's a process, and it's going to be some time whether it's going to be put on a statutory footing. I understand there's complications because it's both justice and health, but there is also in the meantime. And one of the things that we hear continuously at the policing board is that the police are bought into this MARAC because it's the way in which they can actually assess and bring down the figures for how people, suffer domestic violence and sexual abuse. It's one of the tools that they can actually use to make sure it doesn't happen again. But we are getting feedback too often that there's not enough buy-in across the board. So I'm not sure of what that assessment will be for the meantime, particularly on the Department of Health side, before we have any changes. That as we currently stand, is it still status quo? But can we actually increase that engagement and buy-in from all partners right now?
I think when I say we need to let the Task and Finish group do its work, we need to do that as quickly as possible, because if the process isn't working well, we need to address that as quickly as we possibly can. In terms of your reference to buy-in, I know that there were some issues, for example, with education's participation in the process a short while ago. Now, some of that was resource related, and we need to consider that too. So where there are resources required, we need to use those resources effectively, or as effectively as possible. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done here. I think Marcella has given us a fairly good roadmap that we can follow, and I just want to assure you that the Task and Finish group will complete its work as quickly as possible.
So are you thinking, within this mandate, within this year, what is the time frame for that?
Okay, so terms of reference for the Task and Finish group are being developed at the minute. The last meeting that we had with Marcella Leonard, we agreed that we would share a draft of the terms of reference with her to make absolutely certain that that the Task and Finish group is considering the things I think that she found within her review. So that is ongoing at the minute. The intention is to have the Task and Finish group up and running as quickly as possible, and we will aim to complete its work as quickly as possible too. So absolutely within this mandate, Nuala.
Well, I think it would hopefully even long before the end of it. And one of the important elements of actually tackling domestic and sexual violence is with that close working relationship between all departments. And in particular, when it does come to the PSNI, you will recognise that whenever they do receive calls, they simply cannot ignore any of their obligations, and so they will always respond to all incidents, when they are called out. The same can't always be said though, for health when it does come to actually responding and dealing with issues. And it's really important that we do have that kind of relationship where it's not, we don't come to a sense where that's your problem, no, it's your problem. It's really about partner working and partner building that relationships to ensure that we eradicate domestic abuse and sexual violence, but also it's the right support for the individual, because the support can differ from individual to individual. And I just want to then go on to Operation Encompass. We also get updates in Operation Encompass from the policing board, and I actually was going to ask about an evaluation of the programme itself. I think one of the questions that I would have is, and I do think it is an excellent program, essentially ensuring that there's that kind of change or that safeguarding for the school and the young people. But what always happens, one thing I'm not too sure about is what is happening. Is there an automatic referral to the gateway team? Is there always follow-up from social services as to what's going on in this young individual's life? And whilst there may not be in every individual case, what is actually happening for that individual and how, and will that be part of the evaluation in order for us to assess if Encompass isn't working? Because we do need to have that information if we are to kind of assess that it is working properly and if it's actually making any changes. But in the first instance, it does appear to be a good job, especially on the day of, as a recourse of safety net for that young person.
I mean, I think it has been said that it is there to consider the immediate impact on the young person when they appear in school the following day, and to put any supports in place that young person might actually need. Where there is a need to refer that child and the family to social services, my expectation, Nuala, is that a referral will be made by the school under well-established process and procedure. But again, we can get you some more information on what happens if there are concerns about the family, and to give you some assurance, I suppose, that where referrals need to be made to social services, they are being made. But my expectation is that they will be made.
Yeah, I think that's important if we do. I mean, statistics are really important, but it's what happens and what we do with them afterwards for the safeguards to be put in place. And I understand schools are making referrals. I understand the pressures that the social work workforce are under at the minute, but it's in terms of what does that transition look like between one instance and the next? Because quite often actually the police are saying that it's more than one time in which a young person is being referred, and ideally the outcome you'd like it to be that it's one time that they are using, that the police are having to use Operation Encompass, and then never again, because actually there's been mechanisms put in place to actually safeguard. So that would be helpful if you could give that little bit more information on the evaluation. And then my last question is just around cross-departmental working. The overall violence against women and girls strategy. How much has your team linked in with the officials from the executive office regarding the violence against women and girls, and are we seeing that kind of real collaboration that's needed?
And we've worked very closely with the TEO team that has been developing the violence against women and girls strategy. The Department of Health and Justice are represented on EVOG oversight structures, and likewise the Executive Office is represented on what we currently call, or what we called under the last strategy, the Strategy Development Board. It will be the Strategy Oversight Board in the future. TEO will absolutely be represented there too. I do think we need to work together to ensure that there is full alignment between the two strategies, that we don't duplicate effort, for example. I think the way to do that is how we are proceeding. We're part of their structures, they are part of our structures. We did consider a single structure, but I think there are as many things. The strategy, certainly the domestic and sexual abuse strategy, has a lot of things that are not in common with the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, and we wanted to guard against some of those differences, I suppose, being drowned out by having a single structure. So we've decided to continue with two structures.
Thank you, very much.
Orlia?
Thanks very much, Eilish. I know you had a lot to cover in your briefing, because we haven't had sight of the papers yet, so thank you for that. So I just have three quick questions. My first is there any mechanisms in place within the strategy to try and help monitor its effectiveness, to try and assess basically how useful it is and the outworkings of it all, because I think that's important in any good strategy, that you can look back and see how, the outcomes. My second question is around, I don't know, it's probably maybe more one for the justice end of things, but it's just around trying to address the needs of victims within the law and the judicial system. So we know, and it's been covered previously, around some of the really long delays in processing cases of sexual and domestic violence and abuse. So within the strategy, is there going to be anything around maybe like additional training for the judiciary or law enforcement, or it doesn't necessarily need to be training, but any additional measures or steps to try and sort of help streamline that process to deal with some of the long waits. And then the final question is around the public awareness. So is there any consideration of a public awareness sort of programme, particularly whenever you are launching the strategy? Again, I'm just trying to think of ways to, try and help reduce the stigma and help more people, to come forward or to speak up to a trusted contact or whatever. So I don't know if any of that's contained, but that's the three questions from me, if you don't mind.
Okay, so in terms of your first question, then how do we measure the effectiveness of the strategy? That's partly why we've developed the performance framework. So within that framework, you will see against, and it's unfortunate that you don't have it in front of you, but you will see against each of the 5 pillars and the outcomes under those pillars, that we have identified a number of indicators, for example, so the kinds of things that will indicate that we're actually making a difference, and then associated with those indicators we have a number of measures. So that's the first point. Do you want to say anything more about the performance framework? Lindsay?
Really just to say that that'll set out the position and the progress against the outcomes, and we'll use those indicators and data sources to evaluate.
Very good. Thank you.
On your second question, then I think there are a number of different measures that have already been put in place, and the intention would be, subject to funding being available to continue with some of those measures. So one thing that was done was the introduction of sexual offences legal advisors, for example, and that's publicly funded legal advice, and my understanding is that it has helped victims to actually develop their understanding of the justice system, also to build their confidence, I suppose, in the justice system, and it's also been instrumental in helping some people actually stay the course, so they will stay within the system until such times as their case concludes. The intention is also to extend that service, so that's for adult complainants. The intention is also to extend that service to child complainants, so to introduce what are called children's SOLAs. There's also been the establishment of remote evidence, so again that I think assists victims through a very traumatic process. Also work going to pilot pre-recorded cross-examination in children's cases. Advocacy support, so Assist NI, there's a contract in place already with Assist NI to provide advocacy, so that could be like a short-term intervention, but it could also be something that is provided to enable the individual to actually navigate their way throughout the whole of their criminal justice journey. So there's advocacy support too, and the final thing then is prohibition against alleged perpetrators in domestic abuse cases, cross-examining their complainant. So a whole range of measures, I think, that are intended to make the justice journey an easier or as good a journey as it's likely to be for victims. In terms of public awareness, then I think public awareness and training, I think, because those two things are associated with each other, they're pretty central to the strategy. A lot of emphasis within the strategy on those things. Any actions that you can refer to?
So within the action plan is framed around the pillars of the strategy. So within pillar 2, which is the prevention theme, there's a heavy focus on both raising awareness and, as Eilish has referred to as well, building capacity among professionals then to be able to respond. So just in terms of some examples, promoting awareness of the Domestic and Sexual Abuse Helpline, the DART NI website, building a repository, some capacity building measures such as production of a reflections booklet for social workers to kind of reflect on their practice and how they respond to domestic and sexual abuse. So those are just some examples, but there's a heavy focus within that prevention pillar in the action plan around raising awareness.
Very good. And I know, can I just come back just quickly? I know that there's always a lot of requests and asks for, when we're talking about like the big PR public awareness campaigns, you know, like the big TV advertisements and stuff that would come on, you know, particularly in the evening time around news and all the rest. And I know that there is a big call for those, but again, would any of that be factored in at any stage throughout this process to have a specific, you know, like maybe television advertisement PR campaign focused on this issue?
And absolutely, again, subject to funding being available to do it, but the intention would be to use all channels that are available to us, including TV and radio and internet advertising, etc. But alongside that, I think we need to make as much use of social media, for example, as we possibly can. And I know that within the Southern Trust area, for example, they run twice yearly social media campaigns, and I think they have been very successful over time. And there's a lot of that goes on across trust.
As you said, you'll do as much as you can, depending on
absolutely depending on the funding available to do it.
No, that's great. Thanks very much.
Okay, Eilish, no one else has indicated at this stage, but that, I mean, as I said, in the absence of a paper, that was helpful, and it's good to get that update. There's obviously a lot of things there we probably would like further information on as it comes available, so we potentially will have you back at some point. But thank you all for your time, and it's a huge issue and something, I suppose, for the Executive and the Assembly as a whole is a massive priority. So hopefully we can see good progress in time ahead. So thank you. Okay, members. I think there's a couple of things coming out of that, and hopefully we will get further feedback on that. The next briefing we have is item number 7, and it's at tab 7 of your pack, pages 967 to 1015, and it is on Brexit related issues. just wait for officials to come in. Hello, how are you? Good afternoon, and thank you all, and apologies for the delay. We ran a wee bit over time in the previous two briefings, so we appreciate your patience. In attendance today we have Professor Cathy Harrison, the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer, Sean Curley, the Principal Pharmaceutical Officer, David Wilson, Senior Principal Officer, and Canis Ward, Senior Principal Pharmaceutical Officer. So you're all very welcome, and we appreciate your time. If we could just ask you then to make some brief opening remarks, then we'll open up for questions. So thank you.
Thanks very much, and good afternoon, Chair and Deputy Chair and members. I'm Cathy Harrison, the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer at the Department, and thank you for the opportunity to come today and update the Committee on our progress in respect of EU exit. Attending with me today I have Canis Ward, who's the Senior Principal Pharmaceutical Officer, David Wilson, Senior Principal Officer, and Sean Curley, Principal Pharmaceutical Officer. And today I am going to provide members with an overview of issues relating to medicines and medical devices and the Department's response to regulatory divergence. And then my colleague Canis will provide you with an overview of the monitoring, enforcement and market surveillance. And I and my colleagues will of course be delighted to take questions at the end of our update. So in respect of medicines, the Department has continued to work closely with the Department of Health and Social Care in England and the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, the MHRA, and the Pharmaceutical Agency and other relevant stakeholders over the years since our last update to members here at the Committee, which was on the 9th of December 2021. So now our key objective in all that time has been to mitigate any issues that have arisen, and we've worked continuously with DHSC and MHRA to put in place measures to ensure the continued supply of medicines and medical devices into Northern Ireland. May I remind members that under the Northern Ireland Protocol, Northern Ireland continues to comply with the European Union acquis for medicines and medical devices, while Great Britain does not. And when the Northern Ireland Protocol was introduced in January 2021, it led to challenges in maintaining the supply of some medicines and medical devices to Northern Ireland, with a number of manufacturers threatening to cease supply to the Northern Ireland market for commercial reasons. Now, EU legislative changes were adopted then in April 2022, and that helped to address a number of the risks associated with medicines. Notably, it supported the free flow of medicines and investigational medicinal products used in clinical trials into Northern Ireland from GB. But we still had other concerns outstanding, and we continued to raise those through the Department and through our connections with DHSC to the UK Government. Now, these concerns included the requirement for Northern Ireland to continue to comply with the EU's Falsified Medicines Directive, which we call FMD, for medicines packaging, and the requirement for all novel and innovative medicines that fall under the scope of the EU's centralised authorisation procedure to be authorised by the European Commission for the Northern Ireland market. Now, as products that are placed solely on the Great Britain market do not need to comply with these EU requirements, this created choice for market and authorisation holders when they were deciding how to place their medicines on the market, and that meant they could put their medicines on the market for the whole of the UK, just GB or just Northern Ireland. Now, the pharmaceutical industry indicated that in some cases it may not be economically viable for companies to supply some medicines to the relatively small market in Northern Ireland due to the requirements of the EU FMD, because that particular directive actually requires the medicines to be packaged, the packaging to be different, and have a unique identifier on the medicine packaging. Now, in relation to concerns regarding the EU's centralised authorisation procedure, Northern Ireland must follow the EU's timelines and conditions for the authorisation of novel and innovative medicines. So this would include all of our new cancer medicines and new vaccines that come on the market, while GB, however, follows the MHRA timelines and conditions, and authorisation timelines and conditions for these medicines may on occasion be different. from MHRA timelines and conditions, leading to differences between Northern Ireland and Great Britain and the potential for inequitable access for the Northern Ireland population. So overall, these regulatory differences between GB and Northern Ireland have resulted in some medicines being unavailable in the Northern Ireland market. That's sort of where we are at the moment. However, mitigations and recognising those risks, mitigations have been put in place to deal with medicine supplies issues where they arise. And from the 1st of January 2022, the Northern Ireland MHRA authorised route has become operational, and that actually permits the supply of GB authorised medicines into Northern Ireland to meet patients' unmet needs. And as of 28th of May this year, there are a total of 280 medicines on the NIMAR list. That's what we call it. The NIMAR list is a live document. It's continually updated, and medicines have been added and removed over time, and that's dependent on the availability. It has been a very useful vehicle for us in Northern Ireland in relation to maintaining access. Additionally, the EU centralised authorised procedure bridging mechanism was introduced in April 2022, and that permits the MHRA to temporarily authorise the supply of medicines into Northern Ireland for up to 6 months, or until a decision is made by the EC on a parallel application made by the EMA, and that just helped address those issues around timelines between the two regulators. I can advise that over the period since that was introduced, it was only used on 2 occasions, that cap bridging system, and there's no active products on the cap bridging list at the moment. So both of those mitigations have been really important for us, and we rely on them currently, and they've been very useful in ensuring patients' access to medicines. But we do recognise, and we continue to raise our concerns that whilst useful, we needed long-term sustainable solutions for our medicine supply chain. So the Windsor Framework Agreement that was announced in February 2023 did address some of the outstanding regulatory concerns and does present a more long-term solution to Northern Ireland's medicine supply chain. And when announced, the agreement was widely welcomed. Now, the arrangements agreed under the Windsor Framework will disapply the EU Falsified Medicines Directive requirements for packaging of medicines in Northern Ireland, and will also remove Northern Ireland from the EU's centralised authorised procedure for the authorisation of novel and innovative medicines. And that will, in effect, restore a single UK regulatory framework, again, for all medicines that are marketed in the UK. So the MHRA will be our only regulator of medicines. It's anticipated that the Windsor Framework arrangements will be implemented from 1st of January 2025, and we have no reason to believe that will not come into place, and work is well underway to support that in terms of implementation and also in legislation. And the department has been and continues to work with DHSC to support that. Now, moving on to medical devices. Supply of medical devices and in vitro diagnostics were not addressed by the Windsor Framework Agreement, and the EU Medical Device Regulation 2017 and EU In Vitro Diagnostic Regulation 2017 have applied in Northern Ireland since May 2021 and 2022 respectively. Whereas GB continues to follow the UK medical device regulations. And in following the EU acquis, only CE and CE UKNI marked medical and in vitro devices are permitted into the Northern Ireland market, whilst those certified to the UK regulations with a UK CA mark are permitted into the GB market. Now, in recognition of the impact of the new EU regulations, the EU took steps to extend the validity of current CE marked medical devices and IVDs certified under the previous directives, and similarly the UK government laid regulations to allow CE marked medical devices and IVDs to be placed onto the GB market until 2028-2030. Now, this is to provide a transition period for industry, ensuring supply whilst UK medical device regulatory reform is undertaken. And this extension of the validity of these certificates has helped to maintain supply of devices to both the overall EU, UK and Northern Ireland markets, so it's been very beneficial. As GB and Northern Ireland are following different regulatory requirements, however, this divergence can have an impact on supply of medical devices at times. And we continue to work with DHSC on any areas of divergence or risk that may arise for the health service or patients in Northern Ireland. And finally, on this section, just a short update on clinical trials. I am aware that issues have emerged regarding clinical trial investigation and performance studies, where additional requirements fall on manufacturers and sponsors in GB wishing to conduct a medical device study in Northern Ireland under the EU regulations. And those additional requirements have unfortunately led some GB manufacturers and sponsors not to proceed with studies in Northern Ireland. But members will note from the briefing paper that Professor Ian Young, our Chief Scientific Advisor, who's responsible for clinical trials, can't attend today, but would be able to assist with further issues on that should the committee need more information. And finally, and it's my part of the update, and briefly, in terms of regulatory divergence, the Department recognises that EU exit has increased the risk of regulatory divergence, and regulatory divergence can derive from choices made in either Brussels or London. And the Department has taken steps to manage this new and emerging area of risk and to ensure, where possible, early identification of potential divergence. And Department of Health policy officials are now required to horizon scan for potential future regulatory divergence. And the EU Future Relations branch, which is under my leadership, supports the Department to do that horizon scanning and understand any subsequent issues. Members will be aware of the role of the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee in Northern Ireland in scrutinising upcoming EU legislation to apply in here in Northern Ireland. And just by way of example, so there's some examples of potentially divergent policy areas of interest for the Department are the EU proposal on dental amalgam, the EU proposal on regulating substances of human origin, and also forthcoming proposed EU pharma reforms. So as I've said, identifying these issues at an early stage is absolutely critical so that we can understand the implications and what if any, actions need to be taken. The Windsor Framework outlines governance structures for the UK Government and EU to discuss any concerns and risks. Risks identified due to regulatory divergence that may impact on medicine supplies to Northern Ireland can be discussed during via these structures. And the Joint Consultative Working Group, which is a UK-EU body set up under the Withdrawal Agreement, provides for information exchange and mutual consultation relating to Northern Ireland. So I'm now going to pass over to Canis to continue the briefing.
Good afternoon, members. I'm Canis Ward. I'm head of the Department's Medicines Regulatory Group. I'm going to provide some briefing on the monitoring and enforcement responsibilities resulting from the Windsor Framework and some of the various agreements since. So in general, the Department has monitoring responsibilities for a number of goods, including medicines, controlled drugs, drug precursors, poisons and some chemicals. Most of that monitoring is undertaken by my team within the Medicines Regulatory Group. EU exit, and in particular the Windsor Framework, has heightened the requirements and responsibilities for this monitoring and surveillance activity for goods within Northern Ireland and indeed the UK. Essentially, the European Commission recognised that there are some areas of potential divergence in these goods between the UK and including Northern Ireland and the European Union, and requires assurances that there's adequate monitoring of the aforementioned goods to ensure that those, particularly medicines or controlled drugs or chemicals, etc., that might not be in compliance with European standards don't end up in a single market. Okay. So essentially, there's a requirement for enhanced monitoring to protect the European single market, and some of the labelling requirements that Cathy spoke about UK-only packs, etc., that'll allow for early identification should any of these products end up in the single market. Pardon me. So as part of the Windsor Framework arrangements and before any implementation, the UK Government must provide the Commission with written guarantees that there is adequate monitoring and surveillance of medicinal products and other goods across the UK, including Northern Ireland. This written guarantee to the Commission will be provided by UK Government as a whole, and to this Department of Health will be making a contribution to the various areas for which the Department has responsibility in inspection and enforcement. As such, the Department of Health is working closely with the relevant Whitehall departments, Home Office, DHSC, Department of Business and Trade, to discuss, agree and finalise any reporting requirements coming from Northern Ireland to feed into the overall UK written assurance and written guarantee to the Commission. In addition, the Department is putting plans in place to ensure there is enhanced monitoring and surveillance and enforcement activity, and this will result in increased inspection across a number of areas within Northern Ireland. And to do that, the Department's planning, or is in planning and is in process of recruiting additional staff to meet those needs. We're also working with our delivery partners across Northern Ireland and the UK to ensure our obligations and our statutory obligations are met, and work is ongoing in that space. That said, we are confident that the assurances we are given on behalf of the Department and on behalf of Northern Ireland will satisfy the requirements of the Commission, and to ensure that the Windsor framework can be implemented in its entirety in time, as Cathy said, for the 1st of January 2025. I think that's all I have in that space, but happy for any questions, and I think the panel are happy for questions also. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And some of the questions I had have actually been answered in the course of your opening remarks. I suppose just two very quick points. I mean, the dental amalgam issue is probably one of the more high-profile issues that we are all very aware of. However, I am aware that the Windsor Framework Scrutiny Committee are progressing work around some of that, so I think it's important that we do let that work progress. And just to really make the point, I suppose, that it will, I mean, certainly our dentistry sector is probably very challenged by that issue, but it has been underfunded for many years before Brexit even took place, and the professionals working in that area have been highlighting that for many years. So I suppose for us the main concern is that it's those on low income who will be the most impacted by this in the time ahead, and it's just really to make that point, because I think it can get lost sometimes in the discussion and the debate around that. Just in terms of the implementation and of the Windsor framework, and Cathy, you had mentioned it in your remarks around when it comes into effect in the 1st of January 25, and a lot of the issues, I suppose, hopefully will be dealt with. Are there any other areas outstanding that there are still concerns around at this stage?
On medicines, we're hoping that the issues will be resolved with Windsor Framework. Definitely the issue around the divergence in timelines between the two regulators, that will immediately stop, because we will be under one medicines regulator. I mean, there's a chance, I think, with all running, that we still anticipate, for example, that we will need to use the NIMAR system, but that's a great full backstop that we have should we need to. We might need to use that for a short period of time, but generally on medicines, we believe the issues will be resolved in terms of particularly in relation to the flow of medicines and the regulation and licensing of medicines into Northern Ireland. I have advised that there are outstanding issues in relation to medical devices, and my colleague here, David Wilson, is lead for medical devices. If you have any specific questions around that or the implications of that.
Well, not really, but I mean, it would be good to hear just even what the implications will be in terms of that, because it's good for us to be aware of that too, if it is going to become a bigger issue then.
Well, medical devices, it's been an issue has been that the risk from GB to Northern Ireland supply may be affected because of GB manufacturers undertaking to certify their devices to the new UK CA regulations or the MDR regulations. That has been mitigated to a great extent by the extension and recognition of the CE marking and the certification of that aspect. And we continue to monitor supply lines to see where, if any impact is being affected with manufacturers discontinuing the devices. We have seen a few discontinuations of devices, but there's been regular alternatives regularly available. so it hasn't impacted the health service in any form. And we have structures in place to monitor and engage with the HSC should we be impacted severely to monitor that position.
Well, that's quite encouraging, especially if there are alternatives available. Then I think that
for anything we've
that
seen
can
presently,
be,
yes, there's alternatives available.
No, that's good to know. Thank you for that, David. You mentioned there that list, Kathy, as well, and you said there's 280 medicines on that list at the minute. Is that really? And you talked then, I suppose, around the falsified medicines directive. The only barrier I can recall that you mentioned is around maybe packaging. And is there any other barriers that have been identified under that directive?
Falsified Medicines Directive, there's a requirement under that in the EU to put a unique identifier on the packaging, and the idea is that the medicines are scanned when they are supplied to the patient, and they're decommissioned if you like out of the supply system. So it's supposed to be a really it was an EU-wide surveillance system for medicines. Of course, whenever the UK left the European Union, GBs ceased to have to comply with that, but Northern Ireland remained, and then that meant that there were different packaging requirements for Northern Ireland, the small medicines market that we are, compared to GB. So that's why we continually raise this as a major concern. It was continually raised by the pharmaceutical industry that to supply a population as small as ours was always going to be a risk. So that could have been, part of the reason why some companies already have withdrawn from the Northern Ireland market, or in some cases withdrawn some parts of their range of medicines. They may not provide now their entire range of sizes of packs, etc. But on the NIMAR list, that's really an opportunity for an intervention. It's a legal intervention that can be made, which means we can legally use a GB authorised medicine in Northern Ireland if it's identified as being needed for patient safety and for continuity of use. So there's around 280 at the moment, but that shows there's activity in there, and there certainly is activity in terms of the market. In terms of decisions being made around whether or not to continue to supply.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. That's really all from me. I've just got Danny that has a question.
A couple of questions. Certainly, myself and Arlia went through quite a lot of the EU stuff the other day, so we realised there's huge procedures. A huge amount of regulations that are going to be involved in this over the next couple of years when things are coming up. Just wondered, with the deadline of the 1st of January. Is the general election being called going to offset that or anything, or is that quite a safe deadline?
No, we don't anticipate that it will. The regulations have to come in, so the statutory instrument we're expecting to still be laid in mid-July, and for the regulations the framework to come into effect from January. So at the moment, no, we haven't.
You mentioned just about getting a warning about horizon scanning, you called it, whenever there is going to be deviance or divergence. How soon do you get that warning? Is it typically, months and months? Do you get a long enough to be able to?
It varies.
Yeah.
So in some of the issues that I've mentioned are on our horizon now, but no, we don't always get. We're early into this, to be honest. So, for example, I mentioned there that there's some pharma regulations. Well, we've sort of got sight of those now, and they're quite far out, and we can see what's proposed. So, we've got a bit of a lead-in time there. I believe there was a reasonable lead-in time with amalgam, although that's not really our policy area. And also now with substance of human origin, the same. But there can be. I understand there can be, instances, and there have been instances where there's a lot less time, and then in that case we have a limited period of time to consider the implications. But we have very good links with our health department. Has very good links with Department of Health and Social Care, and we will work closely with them in terms of trying to understand the impact.
In the two cases you mentioned, I think you referred to it as the backstop, which I thought was a great word to use under the context. There was two drugs. I think there was shortage of either a device or a drug that you used the backstop.
The bridging
bridging
procedure was used. That was used by the MHRA to provide a 6-month bridge, but for two drugs. I don't know if John, do you know which ones they were? I'm not sure. I can't. But it would have been used where there was a risk of the time of us being disadvantaged because the UK would have been moving ahead and authorising the use of a drug for the GB market ahead of the EU timeline. So
you only had a very short period at that time in order to make sure Northern Ireland was still going to be supplied.
Well, it's a different thing. It's a different thing. That bridging system is a different arrangement, and that's specifically where there are differences in the timelines between the two medicines regulators. So for us in Northern Ireland, that means the EU, and we're still dealing with the EU as a medicines regulator and the MHRA. And for novel medicines, like new medicines that we may be waiting for, and that we may know are coming onto the market, they're on 2 occasions we've had to enact the bridging mechanism, and that's just meant that the UK regulator has been able to authorise the use of the medicines for 6 months, whilst the EU.
Nobody in Northern Ireland missed out.
So, and that's what that is for. That's what that mechanism would be for, as the NIMAR mechanism is as well.
Just there was no impact on any patients or on it.
No.
That's fantastic. And one last thing, you mentioned just because of the packaging FMD, does that mean there won't be a unique identifier on medications here in Northern Ireland now? Because we don't have to have it because it's a European directive, is that correct?
It will be no legal requirement for a unique identifier to be on packaging for the UK market. Now, it'll be up to the pharmaceutical companies themselves whether they leave it on, but it's not active. But there's no legal requirement for it.
One of the things that we're doing through the chair just is Encompass, which is a big computer system which has been adopted in one trust and is about to be rolled out through other trusts. It requires a unique identifier on medications in order to administer tablets safely. It's part of the system. So does that mean
it's a different thing, Danny. It's a different thing. This is a unique identifier. Maybe Canis, do you want to?
I think the unique identifier for FMD purposes is to stop falsification. So the unique barcode, the information in that barcode is uploaded to a central European repository, and when a pharmacist scans that or decommissions it, is what the term is, which we're supposed to be good at, decommissions that pings to the European repository and says this is a genuine medicine.
Right.
That's not falsified, or if it is falsified, it'll come back and say, so that's the purpose of it. But
it has come from,
additional to the barcode, Danny.
Yeah, so it's separate to the sort of administration and Encompass and other IT systems. This is solely to ensure that the medicine's not falsified.
No problem. Thank you.
No problem.
Orlea?
Yes, thank you. Thanks very much, Kathy. I can't believe you says it was December 21 that we had our last briefing at Health Committee. So, yes, and it's just to come back to an issue that we had discussed a couple of times when this this issue first come up around Brexit and the shortage of medicines. So come January 25, then the issues of medicines will hopefully, as you says, be resolved, all being well. And then it's more a case of the devices that you might encounter some problems because we're still falling under EU regulations. And I'm just wondering, in terms of contingency plans and the alternatives that you spoke about, if you are in that position, do they include island-wide solutions? Because it's just coming back to the point that we do have a very small market in terms of the north, and hopefully it doesn't come to that, but if and when we might encounter problems in terms of devices, are we speaking to counterparts in the south to try and find,
yes.
and in terms of the market, yes?
In terms of the market, BSO PALs is business as usual when they come up against a supply shortage. Scan the marketplace for all supply routes, and we do currently have supply routes in from the south of Ireland to BSO PALs in the health service here through suppliers in that part.
Okay, and I'm obviously just making the point because in terms of, even in terms of like turnaround, and if issues do occur, if the
But if
quickest.
the device was manufactured in the south and put in the marketplace in the south, we would be able to be avail of that and we would buy that marketplace. But as a global supply market really
Yes.
causes the supply shortages, and that's where we've been seeing a lot of the impact recently, is just a global supply market due
Yes.
to other factors, not necessarily Brexit.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're confident then with some of the contingency plans that you do have in place that if issues were to occur that, you know,
All market-
basically the
yeah.
patients or the public won't feel
Shouldn't
the
be-
impact? I
shouldn't be
know
as
it's hard to
impacted, yeah.
sort of, it's
We
probably
would
hard.
expect that the marketplace would be scarred and we would be able to retain devices where they were available.
Yeah.
And we have national supply disruption channels with DHSC on that basis to widen that scope. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
I've Diane and then Alan Chambers. If we can ask members to keep them brief because we've only 6 members left and we need quorum. So just so we don't run out of time. Thanks, Diane.
Oh, thank you. Just going back to the medical devices one, can you give us examples of medical devices that have not been available or discontinued to the Northern Ireland market because of the issues? And is there a sense, I have no idea of this, but is there a sense of how much that might have cost the Department of Health over the years?
I wouldn't be able to comment on the costs. And any devices that have been discontinued have been low risk. And they've been like derma creams, and there's other alternatives on the drug tariff for that aspect. Similarly, neuropathies has been discontinued, and there's been other alternatives on the marketplace for that. But we're finding it hard to decipher whether it's down to a commercial decision by the manufacturer as reviewing his product lines, or whether it's purely down to EU exit. So that is an issue we haven't got the grips with at all. But the numbers are small, and it'd be single figures the number of devices we have seen pulled from the market and discontinuation wise.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
And Alan Chambers.
Very quick question. Just the 280 drugs that we talked about are that on this sort of exemption list. I'm just interested in what the process is for getting a drug put on that. You know, who makes the representations and who makes the final decision if a drug will be allowed to go on that list? And to get a drug on that list, what's the sort of timeline?
Happy to take that one. So I'm part of the the process to get a medicine onto the NIMR list as representing the department. So we would work with the Department of Health and Social Care, and we work in conjunction. So if there is a medicine that is notified as being short, or there's a withdrawal or from the market, we have a discussion with DHSC in regard to that. We also bring along procurement colleagues from the trust, the trust in Northern Ireland, and we look at the usage in Northern Ireland and whether that will have an impact whenever we're notified of a particular shortage or a withdrawal from the market. So after we do that, we decide if there's an impact to a patient, and if it's even just one patient who's impacted in Northern Ireland, then the product can be put on the NIMR list. And as Cathy has stated, the NIMR list products can be put on and they can also be taken off. So if that clinical need is no longer needed, the product can be then taken off.
So is that decision internal? It's that you're not going to an outside body to make representations for it? It's just an internal?
It's a meeting between ourselves and DHSC and, like I say, colleagues from the trusts, and we would use that information from the trusts and from primary care, I should state as well, prescription data to determine if there's a patient need.
Timeline, a couple of meetings probably would just get you there.
That one meeting, a decision could be made to add it to NIMR based on the information that we have on clinical patient need, and to actually go onto the list, it's just a matter of a publication on a government website, so it can take 24, 48 hours possibly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all for that update and for the information. I think it's been very helpful for us, and I'm sure we'll have more engagement then as time goes on, I suppose, as we work through these things. So appreciate your time this afternoon. Okay, members, I am conscious that we are losing people, so I'll move quickly through the next few items. So item number 8 is the draft SOR 2024-00, the Human Medicines Amendment relating to original pack dispensing regulations, Northern Ireland 2024. If I could refer members to tab 8, which is page 1017 of your pack, and the Examiner's Statutory Rules Report, which is page 24 of your table papers. This statutory rule introduces original pack dispensing to allow pharmacists flexibility in dispensing medicine quantity and supports increased patient safety by improving access to safety information. The rule also creates a requirement for pharmacists dispensing medicines containing all forms of valproate to dispense in the original manufacturer's packaging with exceptions. Just to advise members, the rule is subject to draft affirmative procedure and the plenary debate on the rule will take place on the 3rd of June, which is next week. And the Examiner of Statutory Rules has reported on the draft SR and has no issues to report to the committee. Are members content with the SR? Okay, so just to agree then that the Committee for Health has considered...
Sorry, Chair, sorry. I have just one question about the SR.
Yeah.
Why are we so far behind in introducing it in Northern Ireland compared to, I think it was 2023, it was introduced in England, Scotland and Wales? Does anybody know the answer to that?
No.
Not off the top of my head, then. I'm certainly happy to go back to the department on that, or maybe have a read at the document just to make sure.
Well, you know, just if somebody comes back to me, it occurred to me that it was a strange thing that we were a year and more behind in the introduction. I just want to know why. Is it an issue of the restoration of devolution? It could be, you know, just what's the issue?
Okay, we can do that, Dan, that's no problem.
Thank you.
So just then to agree that the Committee for Health has considered the draft SR 2024-00, the Human Medicines Amendment relating to original pack dispensing regulations Northern Ireland 2024 and recommends that it be affirmed by the Assembly. Item number 9 then is SL1, the Firefighters Pension Schemes and Compensation Scheme Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2024, Survivors Benefit and Correction of the Public Service Pensions Revaluation Orders Northern Ireland for 2021 and 2022. If I can refer members to tab 9, page 1052 of your pack. The Department is proposing to make a statutory rule that amends certain pension scheme orders to make amendments to the provision for survivors' benefits. This follows the Supreme Court ruling that public sector pension schemes should no longer impose requirement for members to have completed a nomination form in respect of their cohabiting partner in order for survivors' pension to be paid. And just to advise members, the statutory rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure and is expected to be laid as soon as all necessary approvals are in place. Are members content with the merits of the policy and that the Department makes a statutory rule?
Yes.
Thank you. Members, item number 10 then is correspondence. If just could refer you to the correspondence list at tab 10.1, page 1058 of your pack, and correspondence then from pages 1059 to 1118 of your pack. If I could draw your attention to a couple of things. So the first one is the ministerial response on financial pressures by the being experienced with the Children's Hospice and the wider hospice sector, and I suppose this is an issue we've been repeatedly raising. A note in the response, the department has said that they provide funding of around 30% of the contract, whereas the Children's Hospice have said that they had a 50-50 funded model, and we have seen, well, I know I certainly have seen the paperwork from previous years that has confirmed that they were to get that, and that if they were getting that across the Children's Hospice services, this would bring them in line with the equivalent funding model that is delivered in adult hospice services across the north here. So it would certainly help to bridge the widening gap between increased costs and the reduced income that they're experiencing at the minute. As previously said, the Northern Ireland Children's Hospice is the only children's hospice in the north, and the potential impact is quite stark, as I say, as the Minister has outlined in his letter, of what that will actually mean. I'm just curious to understand, it says that the hospice have advised the Minister said they are looking at other revenue making streams that might help to sustain services such as cross-border working and contracting to provide palliative care support on an all-Ireland basis, which is certainly a very positive thing. But I do think that even though we are seeing the huge financial issues, this is a really important issue, and I think it's something that we need to understand what else the department is looking at this time, particularly now that they have a budget. So if members are happy enough, I would propose that we write to the new Minister to outline, I suppose, this has been an ongoing concern, an ongoing issue, and I would like to understand more about what else the department is doing. Are they still considering funding possibilities for the Children's Hospice and what that looks like? Because we do need to understand that. And I think on the basis of the response we receive, I think we maybe need to look at what other steps we can take around that if members are happy enough. Okay, thank you. The other items then, we have a response from the Public Health Agency regarding the promotion of health screening programmes, if anyone has any comments on that. No. We also have the ministerial correspondence on the latest budget 2024-25 assessment. Officials are due to brief the committee next week on the June monitoring round, and it is hoped that the new minister will be able to attend that session also. And just before, are there any other issues anybody wants to raise on the correspondence? No?
Just the chair of the report that did come in last week, accompanied by the minister's letter about the impact of the budget, what it was going to have on current services, and it probably wasn't taken into account the potential of what might come in the monitoring rounds, and hopefully we will see some movement there. That leaves the situation, but I just what weight are we placing on that assessment that came from the department? I assume it was a departmental assessment as opposed to a ministerial assessment as such. It did read quite stark, and I know that I heard one remark in the chamber during the budget debate that that fear tactics were being used. I probably would suggest that rather than fear, it was a reality check. So I'm just wondering where are we going to go with that assessment? Are we going to look at it, examine it, and discuss it with the department? And maybe if they are coming next week, it'll form part of our discussion.
Yeah, I would assume so, and I suppose obviously as we head into the June monitoring round, we'll hopefully have more to work off. I suppose certainly just to make a comment on that debate and the issue around the budget, and we've been saying this, is that we still haven't seen what is going to be done with the budget, and I think that's critical to informing our next steps on that as well, and understand the assessment. I'm not underestimating the challenges of the department. I don't think any of us are. But we do need to see what, with the budget that is there, what will and can be done, and how we can scrutinise that, because as a committee it's very, very difficult to scrutinise when we don't have all of the information. So hopefully we will be in a better position to do that, and then, as I said, they're coming next week, and hopefully the minister will be here.
In terms of, we keep talking about we don't know what the department's going to do with its money. What generally across the other committees, what's all the other departments all have detailed plans of how they're going to spend their budget, or are they in the same position as we are, not really knowing? For instance, education, do we know how every penny in education is going to be spent? Or in infrastructure, has the infrastructure committee been told exactly how its budget's going to be spent? Are we out of step with the other committees, or are we experiencing the same experience as all the other departmental scrutiny committees?
I'm not on any of the other committees, so I can't comment on that. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to it, but I suppose what I'm saying is the minister outlined what can't happen, but we don't know what can, and that's the key bit for me. If he was able to, and I know we're talking now, I suppose, in the past tense because we have a new minister, but it is important now that we start to look at what's going to happen, and then at that point we can identify, how that will fit into what the challenges that have been outlined to us, because we could say loads of things that can't happen, but we don't really know where is the money going then. So it's important to get a fuller picture. I know we can't maybe get every single penny, and as I said, that's a moving picture as well, because we could have additional money in the not so distant future. So it's not being critical for the sake of being critical. I think it's important that as committee, our focus is health. What other committees do is up to them, but I know this is the biggest issue for the people of the North, so I think it's important that we are able to get the information we need on that. Diane?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just very, very quickly, two things. One, we have a new minister does he have different priorities? And what are we doing to get him to come and tell us what those priorities might be? And just to reaffirm your point, those priorities may be different, but we need to understand what the priorities of the department are and what they are going to prioritise. So, in other words, you know, what way are they going to work the budget in order to show us a plan for what they're going to do? And I suppose my final point, is what the previous minister promised us his plan for the reorganisation of services. And I was just wondering if we wanted to know what this minister was going to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as I said, Dan, we have a request in for the minister to come next week. So hopefully we can get a wee bit more meat in the bones in terms of those issues, because it's fair to say that we have been asking for this from the start of this committee since the Assembly was restored. So we're now in a more informed position in terms of the monies that is available, with more hopefully coming. So I think those questions will be very pertinent in that engagement with the Minister. Okay, members, the only other thing just in relation that I was going to raise is we have a letter there from BASWA in relation to social work students and some of the concerns around that. I was going to suggest that maybe we could write to the Minister to get some clarity on funding for study, because there's difficulties in getting places according to this for social work students here, and some are going across the water then. So it would be good to get some clarity in relation to that, and what mitigations has the department considered given the critically high number of vacancies in social work teams. We met with NIPSA reps this week in relation to the ongoing strike action for social workers and children's services. So this is a very, very worrying situation. So if we can get some clarity around that, if members are happy enough. Okay, thank you, members. So happy to note the correspondence then as listed and the suggested actions for the other items on the memo. Item number 11 is the forward work programme. It's at tab 11 of your pack. Are members content to note the briefings as set out in the forward work programme? Are there any other items of business anyone wishes to raise? No. The date, time and place of the next meeting is next Thursday, the 6th of June 2024 at 2 p.m. in this room, room 29, Parliament Building. So thank you all for your time, and safe home.
Say home, everyone.
Home.